Yoakum. Rick Fernandez. Not here. Haysha Freeman. Donnie Lewis. Randy Martin. Donna Montemayor. Ian Shaw. Suzette Tijerina. Rick Tisch. Thank you.
All right, we will show that there are 3 members absent as of now. With that, we will go ahead and proceed on the agenda to B1, and this is the sterile compounding rules. Iman, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning. Agenda item B.1.1 concerns amendments to 291-133. These amendments were proposed by the board at the November 5th, 2024 board meeting and published in the December 27, 2024 issue of the Texas Register. We are starting off in subsection B, definitions. Lines 182, 185, and 188 clarify that ISO class 5, 7, and 8 definitions are based on the concentration of particles 0.5 microns and larger in diameter per cubic meter of air. Lines 192 to 384 add or amend definitions for anteroom, beyond use state, buffer room, cleaning agent, clean room suite, component, designated person, immediate use, master formulation record, restricted access barrier system, and segregated compounding area. Moving into subsection C, personnel. Lines 474 and 479 replace risk level language with category language for pharmacist continuing education requirements. Lines 528 and 532 make the same change for pharmacy technician continuing education requirements. Lines 528 and 532 make the same change for pharmacy technician continuing education requirements. Line 535 specifies all persons who perform or oversee compounding or support activities shall be trained in the pharmacy's SOPs. Lines 543 to 577 amend the applicability and frequency of the aseptic technique evaluation. Lines 597 to 618 amend the media fill testing requirements. Line 633 provides personnel competency shall be reevaluated at least every 12 months for all category levels, with the exception of media fill testing, which shall be completed every 6 months for compounding personnel. Lines 637 to 661 apply the evaluation of hand hygiene, garbing, and gloved fingertip and thumb sampling to all personnel who perform compounding or who have direct oversight of compounding personnel but do not compound. Lines 667 to 689 specify the incubation requirements for gloved fingertip and thumb samples and the required results for passing the evaluation. Line 693 provides that reevaluation of personnel shall occur at least every 6 months for personnel who perform compounding and at least every 12 months for personnel who have direct oversight of compounding personnel but do not compound. Line 702 specifies that personnel who have direct oversight of compounding personnel but do not compound shall complete a garbing competency evaluation every 12 months, and the evaluation shall be specified in the pharmacy's SOPs. Line 713 provides that each classified area shall be sampled for microbial contamination using a risk-based approach. Line 718 requires surface sampling of all classified areas and pass-through chambers to be conducted at least monthly. Line 727 specifies the ISO Class 5, 7, and 8 action levels for surface sampling. Line 731 requires an investigation and corrective action to be performed if surface sampling levels exceed the specified action levels. Line 740 provides that the personnel who only perform restocking or cleaning outside of the primary engineering control shall complete ongoing training as required by the pharmacy's SOPs. We are now moving into subsection D, operational standards. Line 770 provides the maximum batch size for all preparations requiring sterility testing shall be limited to 750 final yield units. Lines 821 through 836 define the three categories of compounded sterile preparations. Lines 963 to 973 provides that dry heat depyrogenation shall be used to render thermostable containers and components pyrogen-free. Line 974 provides when specified conditions are met, compounded sterile preparations for direct and immediate administration are not subject to the requirements for categories 1, 2, and 3. Line 986 specifies that immediate use exemption is limited to simple aseptic measuring and transfer manipulations performed with not more than 3 different sterile drug products. Lines 997 to 1005 replace the requirement that administration must begin within 1 hour of completion of the preparation with the requirement that administration begin no later than 4 hours following the start of preparation. Line 1011 requires personnel to be trained and demonstrate competence in aseptic processes. Line 1017 provides that if a single-dose vial is entered in ISO Class 5 or cleaner air, it may be used up to 12 hours as long as the labeled storage requirements are maintained. Line 1022 provides that open single-dose ampules shall not be stored for any time period. Line 1024 provides that a multiple-dose container, once initially entered, shall not be used for more than 28 days unless otherwise specified by the manufacturer. Line 1028 provides that conventionally manufactured pharmacy bulk packages shall be restricted to the sterile preparation of admixtures for infusion or, through a sterile transfer device, for the filling of empty sterile containers. Line 1033 provides that a multiple-dose compounded sterile preparation shall meet the criteria for antimicrobial effectiveness testing and shall not be used for longer than the assigned beyond use date or 28 days, whichever is shorter. Line 1040 provides a multiple-dose compounded sterile preparation shall be prepared as a Category 2 or Category 3 preparation. Line 1046 provides that in the absence of container closure data, the container closure system used to package the multiple-dose preparation shall be evaluated for container closure integrity, and the container closure integrity test shall be conducted only once on each formulation and fill volume. Line 1052 provides specific requirements for multiple-dose, non-preserved aqueous topical and topical ophthalmic compounded sterile preparations. Line 1059 provides specific requirements when a single-dose compounded sterile preparation or stock solution is used as a component to compound additional preparations. Line 1068 provides that docking and activation of proprietary bag and vial systems for immediate administration to an individual patient is not considered compounding, but docking the system for future activation and administration is considered compounding. Lines 1092 through 1105 specify the air exchange requirements for unclassified sterile compounded areas, ISO Class 7 rooms, and ISO Class 8 rooms, and a requirement that total air exchanges per hour be documented in the certification report for the sterile compounding area. Moving over to the clean room suite. Line 1106 provides that seals and sweeps should not be installed at doors between buffer rooms and anterooms. Access doors should be hands-free, and tachymats shall not be placed within ISO-classified areas. Line 1116 amends the humidity requirement from below 60% to 60% or below. Lines 1119 through 1154 contain non-substantive grammatical changes. Line 1159 provides that for Category 2 preparations prepared from any non-sterile starting components and Category 3 preparations, the primary engineering control shall have a minimum differential positive pressure of 0.02 inches of water rather than a range of 0.02 to 0.05 inches. Line 1163 provides that for Category 2 preparations prepared from any non-sterile starting components and Category 3 preparations, pre-sterilization procedures shall be completed in no worse than an ISO Class 8 environment using depyrogenated equipment. Line 1220 provides that in a primary engineering control, Sterile 70% isopropyl alcohol shall be applied after cleaning and disinfecting and immediately before initiating compounding and applied to the horizontal work surface of the PEC at least every 30 minutes if the compounding process takes 30 minutes or less, or immediately after compounding if the process takes more than 30 minutes. Line 1234 provides that surfaces shall be cleaned prior to being disinfected. The manufacturer's directions shall be followed for the cleaning, disinfecting, and sporicidal disinfectants used, and when 70% isopropyl alcohol is used, it shall be allowed to dry. Lines 1245 to 1288 provide the cleaning and disinfection requirements for the PEC, equipment inside the PEC, work surfaces outside of the PEC, floors, walls, doors, storage shelving, equipment outside of the PEC, and ceilings. Line 1316 provides that an item shall be wiped with disinfectant before being introduced into the clean side of anterooms, placed in pass-through chambers, or brought into the segregated compounding area, provided that doing so will not compromise the item's packaging integrity. Line 1235 provides that an item shall be wiped with 70% isopropyl alcohol before being introduced into the primary engineering control. Line 1331 provides that critical sites, such as vial stoppers, shall be wiped with sterile 70% isopropyl alcohol in the PEC to provide both chemical and mechanical actions to remove contaminants. Next up, we have beyond use dating. Line 1353 provides that when assigning a beyond use date, compounding personnel shall apply drug-specific and general stability documentation and shall assign a shorter beyond use date when the stability of the preparation is less than the following beyond use date limits. Line 1360 provides Category 1 compounded sterile preparations shall be prepared in a sterile segregated compounding area or clean room suite and have a beyond use date of not more than 12 hours when stored at controlled room temperature or 24 hours when stored in a refrigerator. Lines 1367 to 1384 provide Category 2 compounded sterile preparations shall be prepared in a clean room suite. The beyond use date for Category 2 preparations shall be based on whether the preparation is aseptically processed or terminally sterilized, whether it uses sterile or non-sterile starting components, and whether sterility testing is performed and passed. Lines 1388 to 1400 provide Category 3 compounded sterile preparations shall be prepared in a clean room suite. The beyond use date for Category 3 preparations shall be based on whether the preparation is aseptically processed or terminally sterilized, and whether it's an aqueous or non-aqueous dosage form. Lines 1401 to 1419 provide that assigning Category 3 beyond use dates also requires complying with Category 3 specific requirements for personnel competency, garbing, environmental monitoring, and frequency of application of sporicidal disinfectants. Now we are moving into primary engineering control devices. Lines 1440 through 1530 provide that if a pharmacy uses a laminar airflow hood, biological safety cabinet, compounding aseptic isolator, or compounding aseptic containment isolator as its primary engineering control, it shall be initially certified by a qualified independent individual. Lines 1508 and 1548 change the required air quality for the room containing a CAI or CACI used for compounding Category 3 preparations from ISO Class 8 to ISO Class 7. Line 1539 amends the humidity requirement for the room containing a CACI from below 60% to 60% or below. Next, we are moving into personnel cleansing and garbing. Line 1717 provides that before entering the buffer room, compounding personnel shall wipe eyeglasses if worn. Line 1721 provides that personnel shall perform hand hygiene and garbing in an order determined by the pharmacy depending on the placement of the sink. The order of garbing shall be documented in the pharmacy's SOPs, and garb shall be donned and doffed in an order that reduces the risk of contamination. Lines 1726 through 1738 provide the minimum garbing requirements for Category 1 or Category 2 compounding. Lines 1743 through 1754 provide additional garbing requirements for the buffer room where Category 3 compounded sterile preparations are prepared. Line 1760 provides that disposable soap containers shall not be refilled or topped off, and brushes shall not be used for hand hygiene. Line 1768 provides antiseptic hand cleansing shall be performed using an alcohol-based hand rub. Line 1772 provides sterile gloves shall be donned in a classified area or segregated compounding area. Lines 1779 to 1788 provide additional garbing requirements and requirements for disinfecting reusable equipment. Line 1818 provides that quality assurance practices include confirmation that media fill tests indicate that compounding personnel and personnel who have direct oversight of compounding personnel but do not compound can competently perform aseptic procedures. Line 1894 provides sterility and bacterial endotoxin testing requirements for finished preparation release checks. Moving into environmental testing. Line 1965 updates the viable air sampling requirements. For entities compounding Category 1 or Category 2 compounded sterile preparations, viable air sampling shall be completed at least every 6 months. For entities compounding any Category 3 compounded sterile preparations, sampling shall be completed within 30 days prior to the commencement of any Category 3 compounding and at least every 3 months thereafter. Line 1988 provides that the manufacturer's instructions shall be followed for operation of the impaction air sampler. At least 1 cubic meter or 1,000 liters of air from each location shall be sampled, and media devices shall be handled in a manner that avoids contamination. Lines 1998 through 2019 provide incubation procedures and also provide alternative incubation procedures to shorten the overall incubation period. Line 2020 specifies the ISO Class 5, 7, and 8 action levels for viable air sampling. Line 2024 requires an investigation and corrective action to be performed if viable air sampling levels exceed the specified action levels. Moving into quality control. Line 2081 provides sterility testing shall be performed on a number of units equal to 5% of the number of compounded sterile preparations prepared. Line 2083 provides that sterility testing resulting in failure shall result in an investigation and corrective action, both of which shall be documented. We are now moving into subsection E, records. Line 2102 provides that compounding records for compounding pursuant to patient-specific prescription drug orders or medication orders not prepared from non-sterile ingredients shall be maintained by the pharmacy and shall include a complete formula unless the preparation is compounded according to the manufacturer's labeling instructions. Beginning on lines 2027 are the record-keeping requirements for compounded sterile preparations prepared from non-sterile ingredients or prepared for more than one patient. Line 2130 requires a master formulation record and specifies the information included in that record. Line 2157 provides a compounding record that documents the compounding process shall be created for all preparations and specifies the information included in that record. No substantive changes were made to subsection F, so we are moving into the final subsection G, recall procedures. Line 2313 provides in the event of a recall, the pharmacist in charge shall ensure that the distribution of any affected compounded sterile preparations is determined, including the date and quantity of distribution. Line 2322 provides that the pharmacist in charge shall ensure that any unused dispensed compounded sterile preparations are recalled and any stock remaining in the pharmacy is quarantined. Line 2326 provides procedures for the recall of out-of-specification dispensed compounded sterile preparations. Line 2333 provides that SOPs for the recall of out-of-specification dispensed compounded sterile preparations shall contain procedures to determine the severity and urgency of the problem, determine the disposal and documentation of the recalled preparation, and investigate and document the reason for failure. These amendments, again, were proposed by the board at the November 5th, 2024 board meeting and published in the December 27th, 24 issue of the Texas Register. The board received 5 public comments on the proposed amendments. The board received comments from the Texas Society of Health System Pharmacy expressing support for the amendments and recommending the board adopt and enforce sterile compounding practices that align with USP 797 standards. The board received comments from the Texas Hospital Association expressing support for some of the amendments and suggesting the inclusion of standards and provisions for the transfer of sterile compounded medications from Class C pharmacies to Class F pharmacies that are under common ownership. The board received comments from the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding expressing support for some of the amendments, suggesting adoption of USP standards for sterility testing for batches of up to 250 units, revisions to certain definitions and the component selection requirements, clarification of the beyond use date documentation required for non-aqueous Category 3 preparation and the gloving procedures, removal of outdated references to a buffer room that is not physically separated from the anteroom, requiring sterile one-step disinfectants and filter integrity testing on each filter if multiple filters are required, and allowing pharmacies to determine their maximum batch size and beyond use dates and make copies of commercially available drug products that are not reasonably available, and expressing concern about the lack of a requirement for pharmacies that compound Category 3 preparations to perform media fill testing conducted under the most challenging or stressful conditions. The board received comments from John Daniel suggesting a maximum batch size of 250 units, revisions to certain terms and phrases, removal of the definition of designated person, and outdated references to a buffer room that is not physically separated from the anteroom, and the requirement for an airflow velocity meter. Requesting clarification of the aseptic technique evaluation requirements for personnel who do not compound nor have direct oversight of compounding personnel, and expressing concern that the pressure requirements for a biological safety cabinet and compounding aseptic containment isolator may be incompatible with the pressure requirements in USP Chapter 800. The board received comments from Jordan Cuccia with Empower Pharmacy suggesting a maximum batch size of the quantity that can be appropriately validated for sterile assurance using media fill simulation studies and sterile testing conducted in accordance with USP 71 or an equivalent compendial method approved by the board. On February 24th, 2025, the board submitted the proposed amendments to the Office of the Governor Regulatory Compliance Division for review. On May 2nd, 2025, the division issued a determination letter that found the proposed amendments are a reasonable exercise of the board's authority to protect public health, safety, and welfare by ensuring that pharmacies engaged in sterile compounding operate in a safe and sanitary environment. The division determined that the proposed amendments are consistent with state policy and approved the amendments for final adoption and implementation. And I will now turn it back over to President Spear.
Thank you, Iman. At this time, we have a number of individuals that have requested the ability to come before the board. We will give each entity 3 to 5 minutes. If you've got duplicative statements, the person in front of you has already said it, then let's not duplicate those statements. So at this time, we will call Jonathan Head from Las Colinas Pharmacy. And please introduce yourself.
Good morning. Is this on?
Not yet.
I need to. How about now? Okay. Good morning. My name is Jonathan Head. I'm a compounding pharmacist and co-owner of Las Colinas Pharmacy in Irving, Texas, where we have served the state of Texas in sterile and non-sterile compounding for 41 years. I also currently serve on the board of directors for the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding. First, I just want to start by thanking each one of you for your time, service, and commitment to our profession. I recognize the respect and intent behind the rules to protect patient safety, preserve drug access, and support our compounding profession. Today, I'd like to focus on two specific provisions in the proposed rules that I believe are out of line with scientific evidence and real-world 503A compounding operations. Let's see, more importantly, if adopted as written, these proposed rules risk creating significant financial burdens that could cripple small and rural compounding pharmacies or be passed on to patients. Either outcome would ultimately limit patient access to these vital and sometimes life-saving therapies. The board's mission has always been to adopt the least restrictive means necessary to protect public health and preserve patient access. My first concern is with the beyond use stating for Category 3 aqueous preparations. On mine, it was line 1405. I think it might be one or two lines different based on what was just read. The proposed rule puts a hard cap on BUDs at 60, 90, and 120 days, depending on the storage preparation. What's troubling is that the proposed rule for non-aqueous in line 1411 allows for literature and testing to justify extended BUDs up to 180 days, but the proposal provides no flexibility for aqueous preparations. This creates a double standard, and worse, it removes pharmacists' ability to apply science, third-party testing, or even FDA-published data to justify a longer evidence-based BUD. Furthermore, it will unnecessarily drive up costs by forcing pharmacies to make more frequent, smaller batches. For example, Las Colinas Pharmacy recently did some testing on two different formulations with a reputable lab in Houston. We invested just over $120,000 on these tests, including the finished vials and API powder that we submitted. With these new proposed rules, despite having this extensive data on our exact formula to support 180-day refrigerated beyond use state, we would be limited to the 90 days refrigerated. Based on our studies, the repeated freeze-thaw cycles degrades the product, and therefore freezing wasn't an appropriate option for us. I urge the board to allow for evidence-based BUD extension for aqueous compounding, just as it does for non-aqueous products. If stability and sterility can be demonstrated with data and validated testing, we must allow science to guide the decision-making rather than an arbitrary timeline. The second and final thing I want to bring up is the proposed 5% sterility testing requirement for Category 3. I believe this is line 2081. Currently under USP 797, if we produce a batch of 750 vials, we would be required to test 20 vials based on USP 71 sample tables. Under the proposed Texas rule, we would need to test 38 vials, so nearly double that amount. This adds unnecessary cost, waste, and administrative burden with no documented safety advantage. Sterility testing is already one of the most expensive components of the sterile production, requiring nearly twice the testing volume on large batches, especially across multiple batches, will drive up the cost significantly, potentially leading to many pharmacies to cut formulations, discontinue sterile operation, or pass those costs on to the patients, all of which will limit patient access to compounded sterile preparations. I respectfully propose that Texas adopt a testing cap of 20 vials per batch, similar to the cap that's in USP 71. This approach would maintain a high level of safety without introducing unjust economic hardships. These two rules, if adopted as written, will reduce access to sterile compounded medications across Texas, especially in rural and underserved communities. The economic burden will force many small independent pharmacies to reduce services, consolidate formulations, or close their doors altogether. Texans are already struggling financially, and these unmerited costs increase on essential medications will only serve to limit access to life-saving therapies. So I implore you to continue the great legacy that Texas State Board of Pharmacy is nationally known for, a reputation of thoughtful, common sense regulation that effectively balances patient safety with patient access. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions for this speaker before we release them?
Jonathan, what were you saying, the cap
On which part?
on the testing?
For the 5%? Yeah, so as it's written right now, there is just a flat across the board 5% testing rule. When we have batches up to 750 as our proposed, we would have to submit about 38 vials, which I recommend a cap like USP 71 has. They either do 2% or 20 vials, whichever is less.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay. The only other thing that I just have a question for the board, more of an understanding on if we did a category 3 with a batch size of less than 24 vials, what would be our, options for beyond use stating on those? I saw there was some specific outlined if you do a batch size of greater than 24 vials with sterility testing and everything, but I wasn't sure what that would look like. An example for category 3 for a small batch, what would be the beyond use stating? Would it go back to the category 2 options? Because I did see there was on category 2, there were options for shorter beyond use stating without testing for sterility, but it was in line 1398.
I think that's probably something we need to discuss.
Okay. All right. Well, thank y'all.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we will bring Empower Pharmacy forward. As a total, you'll have that same 3 to 5 minutes. And there were a number of individuals, so I'm going to let you introduce yourselves and tell us who's here.
I think I'm on. Perfect. Hi, I'm Frank Cradfield, Director of Pharmacy Operations for Empower Pharmacy. I'm joined with Jordan Kucha, the PIC for our 503A compounding facility in Houston. Sadly, Joel D'Souza couldn't join us. He's under the weather. He is on Teams if there's specific questions. He is our Director of Quality. First, I want to thank the board for the opportunity to speak in front of you all today. We did want to comment on batch size beyond use date, similar to Jonathan, so I know the comment was made not to repeat, so we'll stick in that fact. We align with his comments regarding batch size. The biggest thing we want to put forward first, many of us attended the NABP convention about a month ago, and we were pushed to innovate to move the profession forward. We appreciate to have the opportunity to discuss how innovations such as automation can really improve access to provide safe, affordable medications to as many patients as possible. And I will turn the floor over to Jordan.
Yeah. So Jules is online here. So Jules, did you want to give some of the technical pieces to the board?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, members of the Texas State Board of Pharmacy. My name is Jules D'Souza. I'm the Director of Quality Operations at Empower. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and for your continued work protecting the health of Texans. This is mission critical, upholding the quality standards while promoting innovation and collaborative practices to support positive patient outcomes. And it's one that deeply resonates with Empower Pharmacy. So I'm going to focus today mainly around the batch size and talk about automated filling. So the proposed 750 unit batch size limitation is intended to reduce contamination risk and operator fatigue. And while we agree with the spirit of that intent, I'd like to raise a few considerations based on current technologies. Modern aseptic compounding has evolved significantly. At Empower, we operate semi-automated filling systems capable of producing up to 50 vials per minute, and we typically fill at about 23 vials per minute. This minimizes operator burden while maintaining strict sterility assurance. These automated systems are specifically designed for high volume production with minimal human interventions, one of the most effective ways to reduce microbial contamination. Limiting these systems to 750 units, however, would unintentionally increase manual interventions by requiring more frequent compounding, thereby defeating the very safety objective of the regulation that it aims to promote. And it would also increase the cost of the medication while reducing the ability to provide the access at the current level. So we respectfully propose that pharmacies using validated, semi or fully automated equipment be permitted to compound batch sizes up to the quantities supported by a successful media fill simulation or qualification. So this would allow for a risk-based approach that is scientifically grounded and aligned with the USP standards while still ensuring patient safety. I did have some comments prepared for beyond use dates and component selection, but those comments have already been made by the previous group with Jonathan Head, so I'll defer back to Jordan.
Yeah, and lastly, we just wanted to respectfully request that the board consider a grace period of around 18 months if you do move forward with the sterile compounding amendments. And I think we thank you for your time and consideration, and welcome any questions that you have for us.
All right, any questions for this group from the board? All right, seeing none, thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Next, we have Matthew Lester from PCCA. Any questions for this individual?
I do have one question.
Yes, sir.
Just some clarification, just because I just wanted to confirm something, because I've seen this in two statements so far, and just since you brought it up, I wanted to kind of highlight it. Looking at the gloving, so in clarifications that I've personally made with CMS and with USP, it doesn't seem like it's restricted to gloving in the anteroom. It could happen in either spot. It just needs to happen not in a primary engineering control. So I guess my question is there other information that you're pulling from outside of USP? Can you
Will
tell
you check
us?
to make sure that you have your mic on?
I am so sorry. This whole time.
Your voice was just so clear we were able to hear it
Mhm.
well. Can
Thank
you
you.
reference the specifics? Can you reference the specific spot in? I don't know if you have it in front of you or not. That's okay if you don't. I'm not trying to give you a
Oh,
hard
in
time. but
USP?
the specific spot where it specifies in USP that it has to occur in the anteroom, because I don't think it says that.
I would have to pull that up.
Oh, okay. I just want to make if you had it in front of you, I was going to snag it from you, but I can reference it on a break or something. Thanks. That's all I had.
Any other questions? Thank you for your time. Next, we will call Stephen Snow.
Good morning. My name is Stephen Snow. I'm a compounding regulatory consulting attorney. I represent a number of different 503A and 503Bs in Texas, as well as those outside of Texas who ship into Texas. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again this morning. I was here back in November when this came through the board's agenda at that point in time, and want to kind of reiterate a number of my comments from before, and I also wanted to echo my support for the comments that have been made earlier this morning by Las Colinas, Empower, PCCA, and others here. I wanted to put a kind of a realistic face on the economic impact statement that was presented as part of this version of the rule changes. In the economic impact statement, it goes through a number of different areas in which compounders are going to incur additional costs. And I wanted to focus the board's attention on some of these specifically. Focusing first on the preliminary testing. It says there at the very end of the section that we're looking at roughly $6,300, $6,330 in additional preliminary testing that may be needed by compounding pharmacies. In actually going through the numbers, it gives a range of the low number is $3,795 to $6,330 for preliminary testing per formulation. So it's very uncommon we only have a few formulations that are done by a compounding pharmacy. Almost any compounding pharmacy is going to do 100 or more. Often it's 200 or more. If we put those preliminary tests per formulation at a 100 formulation figure, we're looking at a $379,000 low estimate to a high estimate of $633,000 incurred by compounding pharmacies for testing. Obviously, if it's at 200 formulations, we're doubling those figures to $759,000 on the low end to over $1.26 million on the high end. Those are staggering figures for these small and mid-sized compounding pharmacies that cannot absorb those kinds of costs. It appears that as we go through the process of developing these regulations, the underlying intent or incentive that has driven the movement by USP and FDA and other regulation changes they've made is to protect the public against potential harms and dangers that might arise as we see compounding pharmacies grow in size, grow their batch numbers, and start acting more like manufacturers. The problem is these costs that are baked into all these regulation changes are doing the opposite. it's driving those small batch compounders out of business, leaving only those large compounding entities to pick up the slack. Therefore, increasing the likelihood of the risks that we're trying to alleviate by implementing more of these regulatory concerns. I believe that we need to develop a carve-out system for small batch compounding particularly. There's certain elements of the preliminary testing, container enclosures and other preservative testings that can be eliminated for those small batch compounders. One of the reasons I would focus on small batch size compounding is that if we look at just the expanded sterility and endotoxin testing, in the board's own economic impact statement, it references a range of $300 to $500 in additional costs for this per batch expanded sterility and endotoxin testing. If we're looking at a compounding, a 500 unit batch of compounding, that's relatively easily spread among the different units. $500 by 500 units, that's only $1 a unit. But what about the compounders who are only compounding 10 units? That same testing that they're required to do increases every single vial they produce and it costs by $50. It's going to drive them out of business. It's not it might happen, it might be a negative. This is a known, these are known figures. It's going to disparately impact small batch compounding and drive them out of business. And so I'd ask that the board considers before it implements these changes to provide a carve-out system for compounding in batches of less than 25, maintaining its normal or its existing structure of 24 units or less that would exempt them from some of these onerous additional testing requirements that are so expensive and disparately impacting these small batch compounding activities of small pharmacies. Thank you.
Any questions for this individual? Thank you, Mr. Snow. Next, we will hear from Clint Narver, and I hope I said that right.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Clint Narver. I'm a lawyer with the law firm McGuire Woods, and we represent a number of sterile compounding pharmacies in the state of Texas. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I want to begin, and I'll keep my comments brief, but I want to begin by pointing out that we have a lot of common ground. We share the same goal, ultimately, which is using the least restrictive means to ensure the best outcomes for patients. My clients and I and you all have that goal in common. We do not believe that this proposed rule accomplishes that goal. It is not the least restrictive means that could be used. It imposes devastating costs on small independent pharmacies in your state, as you've heard from other folks, and I'm not going to go into the details of that, but devastating costs that will put them out of business potentially. And in some respects, we believe that the proposed rule also creates uncertainty for patients and creates potential risk for patients. One of the ways you see that is through the beyond use dates, and that's already been addressed, so I'm not going to go into detail there. I would just note that they're highly restrictive, and they minimize the importance of drug-specific scientific evidence and professional judgment. And as I'm sure we would all agree, compounding pharmacists, we don't want to turn them into box checkers. This is a profession. It's a learned profession and a valuable one. While we want to have rules and structures in place that guide their work, we want to incorporate into that structure the ability for these pharmacists to exercise their professional judgment and rely on valid, established science. That will lead to better efficiencies and outcomes for patients. There is a temptation, I think, to look at the U.S. pharmacopoeia, a temptation for any one of us to look at the U.S. pharmacopoeia, USP 797, as if it were some form of law, as if it were some piece of legislation. It looks kind of like that. It's structured kind of like that. It's got definitions, it's got requirements, it's very detailed and comprehensive. But ultimately, when we pause and we think about it, we know that USP is not law. It is something prepared by scientists and academics. It is advisory, and it's a set of standards. And I think that that is the key. It's a set of standards. And standards are not the same thing as regulations, as we all know. For a standard to become a regulation, additional work has to be done. The folks at the USP, when they were preparing these various components of Section 797, were not thinking about the state of Texas. They weren't thinking about the needs of the state of Texas in comparison with other states. They weren't thinking about the needs of local communities within the state of Texas, the needs of the pharmacies there, the patients there. They weren't thinking about the rural communities in this state. They weren't thinking about the veterinary communities in this state. All of that work needs to be done at the state level. And we believe that a failure to rigorously address that here is going to have these devastating consequences for your local, small, independent pharmacies. And not only it's potentially going to put them out of business, and not only are we talking about consequences for specific businesses that could happen immediately if this rule moves forward, I think we're also talking about a structural change that this rule could put into place that would change the face of compounding in the state of Texas going forward. And I just want to briefly explain myself, and then I will stop at that. But you basically have a proposed rule, as you've heard from other folks, that disfavors these small, independent compounding pharmacies. And it has the effect, perhaps unintentional, but it has the effect of favoring large corporate pharmacies that are going to be able to withstand any immediate financial impact. It's negative. And are going to be able over time to take advantage of a system where their competitors, their smaller competitors, are no longer there. And that is something that I do not think is one of our goals. And in addition to that, the other party that potentially stands to benefit are 503B outsourcing facilities. And as you all know, outsourcing facilities are regulated primarily by the FDA. They are subject to what are called current good manufacturing practice requirements. But I think this is important to note. The way that the FDA implements those CGMP requirements on outsourcing facilities is through a guidance document. A guidance document is essentially advisory. And while it has standards and principles, it also bakes into it a lot of discretion for those outsourcing facilities to go about defining their good manufacturing practices and implementing them. So the upshot of all this is that the proposed rule would treat your local compounding pharmacies here serving individual communities, the face of communities, would treat them far more harshly than the federal government is treating these giant outsourcing facilities that are also going to be operating in the state. And I think that is not our goal. And if we were sitting in this room 5 years from now and that eventuality had come to pass, we would all be looking at each other saying, this wasn't what we wanted to do here. So in sum, we do not believe that the proposed rule is the least restrictive means of promoting the best interests of patients. We would ask that you do not move forward with the rule as is, as it's in its current state. You continue to look at the economic impact, and to the extent you're moving forward with the proposed rule, do it in a way that considers some of these alternatives that folks are bringing to the table. Alternatives that would allow these smaller independent pharmacies in your state to withstand this change and to continue providing what I think we would all agree is the very valuable service they're providing.
Okay, you're at time, so I want to
Right,
make
all right, I see it. I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Any questions for this individual? All right, thank you. Next will be Cole Knudsen.
right. Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
You guys hear me? Okay. So I signed up twice, so I don't know if I'm going to do both of those at this one sitting, and I can do that. But the first one, I'm actually here on behalf of Aaron Reich with TSHP. He wasn't able to make it, and so I've got a prepared statement from TSHP from him, and then I had some other independent comments outside of TSHP that relate to me being a task force member.
Okay, I only had you signed up once. I had Aaron signed up, so I was a little confused by that. So you're actually representing both yourself and TSHP?
Well, first I'll go with the TSHP statement from Aaron, and then I've got some comments on my own at the end, if that's okay.
We'll go ahead and allow it, unless TSHP wants to. She's saying that she's going to let you read a prepared statement.
Okay, great, thank you.
So keep that one to 3, and then we'll give you your 3 to 5.
Sure, appreciate it. Okay. So as I said, Aaron was not able to make it, and I've got a prepared statement. Good morning, President Spear, Executive Director Carroll, members of the board, and staff. My name is Cole Knutson. I'm a practicing pharmacist with direct experience working in sterile compounding facilities across Texas. I also had the privilege of serving on the sterile compounding task force convened by the Board of Pharmacy to review the proposed revisions to 797. Today I'm here on behalf of the members of the Texas Society of Health System Pharmacy. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. TSHP strongly supports most of the proposed updates as presented by the task force to align with USP 797. We commend the board's deliberate and thoughtful work alongside the sterile compounding task force in bringing rules forward to reflect the nationally recognized patient safety standards. Our position is rooted in one core principle: safe sterile compounding saves lives. As someone who has stood in clean rooms, supervised batch preparations, and navigated operational challenges of sterile compounding, I can tell you from experience there is no substitution for rigorous, standardized practices. USP 797 sets clear expectations for environmental controls, aseptic technique training beyond use stating they're essential to ensuring patient safety. 797 offers a comprehensive, evidence-based framework for ensuring the quality and sterility of compounded preparations. These standards, covering environmental controls, personnel training, aseptic technique beyond use dating, are not arbitrary. They are critical safeguards that prevent contamination, minimize error, and promote consistency across facilities. For the most part, the proposed categories 1, 2, and 3 that are in 291.133 appropriately consider risk levels, batch sizes, beyond use datings, echoing the intent of USP and federal 503A provisions. As the FDA stated, there is no compelling reason for patient-specific compounded medication to require longer bud than those outlined in 797. To do so outside of the 797 recommendations, minimum standards introduces unnecessary risk. Failure to align Texas rules with 797 creates real and present dangers. It increases the likelihood of microbial contamination, exposes pharmacies to legal liability, and fragments our regulatory landscape. We need only to look at the tragic cases of harm and death in recent years, from overdosing errors to contamination-related infections, to understand the consequences of weak oversight. Included in the letter you guys had referenced earlier was the letter from TSHP, actually, that came from Aaron. It outlines several other areas not included in this statement, so I know you guys looked at that, but it had supporting organizations of, American Pharmacist Association, National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, and FDA. Also, it goes over, the risk of non-alignment with patient safety, legal and regulatory challenges, and reduced efficiency that may result in losing the blueprint status with NABP. So to kind of conclude, also there was a section at the end with references, a couple of videos about some of those health dangers I talked about, and also the BUD scientific rationale for the proposed revisions to 797, and also as it relates to batch sizes. And then the last thing at the end, TSHP also had released a policy position regarding this, and it also echoes those same sentiments of following the national recommended standard of USP 797, which they're going to have to basically follow anyway, so it creates that dichotomy between regulations. In conclusion, TSHP urges the board to adopt USP 797 standards without deviation, to stand firm in upholding the highest possible standards for patient care. We also welcome continued dialogue to support implementation, education, and compliance efforts. Adoption of these rules also ensures pharmacies remain eligible for programs like the NABP Multi-State Inspection Program, promoting consistency, efficiency, trust in our inspection systems. Thank you for your time, your service to the people of Texas, and your commitment to pharmacy excellence. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Why don't we go ahead and go to your statement?
All right.
I gave you 5 on that one, so maybe 3 on yours.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. That's fine. So just kind of wanted to speak a little bit, my experience being a member of the task force. It was a great honor to be included in that, and I wanted to come hopefully to the conclusion meeting today. Fingers crossed. But there were a few areas that, I wanted to bring up that I just thought was important that we don't necessarily align with 797. The first one being the BUD for Category 2. For no real good reason, we're skipping the dating that comes with sterility testing and assigning sterility testing straight to terminal sterilization. And those things build upon each other. And so extending that dating in the way it's written in the board rules right now that are proposed actually moves that dating up to the terminal sterilization, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's the first thing. The other thing was the batch size. So there was a lot of back and forth and discussion and debate on the batch sizes when we were working on with the group. And we came up with 500. So we compromised, it's 250 and 797. 500 seemed like a good compromise. It was doubled. And we agreed on that. But I noticed that during board meetings, it actually got tripled. That's a bit of a concern. I think 750 is too much. There's plenty of evidence to show that batch sizes, and maybe there should be a carve out with automation, because what he said with automation made a lot of sense. But when you're talking about manually prepared products, increased batch sizes definitely increase the amount and there's of contamination, and there's plenty of evidence to support that. Also, when it comes to the testing, the 5% rule, I'd be fine if we went back to what the 71 recommends and follow those standards as well. Either way, but I really think we should drop that back down to 500. I mean, there's really not that much difference between making multiple batches and making a single batch. Being in the business, except for in that automation context, that really is kind of a different animal. So, and then moving to the next thing real quickly, I just wanted to, acknowledge that in Category 3, there were some huge concessions made that are not included in our rules, and I think it's important to point that out to the group because there could be some regulatory concerns for people if the FDA happens to visit them. But basically, and I'm fine with the concessions that we made. I just wanted to point them out. So because they were going to be quite expensive for some of these pharmacies to complete, but it was the documentation for Category 3. So stability studies, a description of the methodology, validation of the method, stability, indicating analytical method, and all of the results of that study. So that was not really included in the rules, but it could be it's a gap basically between 797 and in the board rules, and could put somebody in some regulatory peril if they get visited by the FDA, because we all know, as the previous gentleman stated, these are recommendations, but chapters under 1,000 are federally enforceable, and I can tell you from experience that they do. That's what they look at, and they do enforce it. And then that was almost everything I had to say, except for one last comment just on the batch sizes they were talking about earlier with the small batch sizes and how that would, cause a lot of extra cost for smaller pharmacies. We have to remember that there's no requirement to extend the dating. So, they can, without doing sterility testing, they can get 30, 45, and 60 days with small batches. And so, he was saying there needs to be a carve out. There actually is. You don't need to try to get 180 days for a small batch. So, with that being said, that's everything I've got. I appreciate everybody's time. And if there's any questions.
Any questions for Cole? All right. Thank you so much, sir.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, that concludes our individuals that have registered to speak. Board members, my recommendation is that if you look at it, it's pretty well divided up between definitions, personnel, op standards, records, office use and recall, is that we take each section as a group to see what the recommendations and thoughts are. I will also at this time say if you need a break, this might be a good breaking point before we go into definitions. So I'm seeing a lot of heads. Okay, so at this time it is 11:09. Can we come back at 11:15? Is that too quick? Okay, we'll go ahead and show adjourned until 11:15 then. So at this time, board members, looking at how it's broken up, we'll start with, starts at line 160 basically, but looking at the definitions. So we want to look to see, are there, when you look at what Iman went through, and it's about line 160 to 410, what comments, questions, discussion we have in this section.
I think an easy win. I got to find the line, but there was a couple of comments about some
Okay,
outdated
I'm not sure
language.
your microphone's on.
Oh, it is. I'm just not close to it. How
Okay,
about
get
now?
close to it.
Yeah, I'm on it. So I think probably an easy thing we could kind of start off with in this section, and I got to find exactly where it is real fast. But there were a couple of comments about some outdated language about unseparated buffer rooms and ante rooms. And so that's kind of not a thing anymore. So it may be good to remove that. I'll find the line real quick, but that might be just an easy thing for us to knock out.
Okay. Comments on that? Do we want staff to look at that, removing that outdated language? Thoughts? Iman, would that give you enough to go on? Okay.
I found the lines if you want me to.
Okay, what are they?
Yeah, so there's two sections. So there's 1141 through 1143, and then 1147 through 1149.
So it's actually not in the definitions. It's down in,
Yeah, that's correct. Sorry about that.
okay. So we'll have that down for when we get down to that section. I'll give you everybody a chance to kind of read through all of those, see if there was anything else. Hear from, you didn't have your microphone on, but Jenny just said she was good with definitions. Anybody else that had any questions or comments with the definitions? All right. So from there, we will go down to personnel, and personnel starts on 411 and runs through 758. Any questions or concerns from this section? $758, or really 757. 758 is where we start with operational standards. Because that's where little d starts.
I do have some comments.
Great. You have to pull your microphone close to you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can. Can you hear?
Can y'all hear me?
There we go.
There. Let's see. 567. The phrase, the personnel who have direct oversight of compounding personnel but do not compound, I think is very confusing. And I think we've talked about this at previous meetings. I didn't know if there was a way where, and I think the original intent for this was to remove pharmacists, like those who perform that final verification, who are looking at the log, checking the vial for particulates, looking at the label, don't have to go back to do fingertip touch plates once a year or do a media fill when they're never, ever in the clean room. So I don't see where going through the rules and where this verbiage is that it ever extracted that out. I don't see that that is an exemption from the direct oversight of compounding personnel but do not compound. So could we direct the staff to come up with another set of verbiage that's not so confusing?
So you're saying that lines 567 through 577.
Well, and it occurs throughout the rest of the chapter.
There's not any delineation between, and I'm asking, I don't know, I need to look, but is there any delineation between, is there any reason we couldn't change this to just pharmacists who do not compound? Or something simpler? Is there a separation of pharmacists checking versus oversight? I don't know that there is, at least not in this draft. So seems like something we could fix easily.
But Jenny, are you also saying that we did not take out the piece about the glove fingertip sampling?
No, it's still in there.
And did you want that taken out for the non?
Well, if they're just doing the final verification, like I mentioned, they shouldn't have to do those and risk contaminating the clean room when they're not normally back there.
So 641 still, it says glove fingertip sampling shall be performed for all compounding personnel and personnel who have direct oversight of compounding personnel.
Exactly.
So you want that part right there.
That and in the media fill section. Or if there's another way to word it, because there are pharmacists who do those that do go back that need to do fingertip and media fills.
So if we left 573 the way that it is now, where it says the pharmacy's SOPs shall define the aseptic technique evaluation for all personnel who do not compound nor have direct oversight. If we left that in there, but then addressed in those two areas where it's fingertip and media,
that would
yes, that?
Yeah, that would work.
So I think that's problematic, though, and that's actually contrary to like what the current guidance is and even our previous rules. So the idea being that the pharmacist should be able to demonstrate competency in the thing that they are supervising. And so like when we look at, so for example, just carving out one specific item just as an example. So like if we look at like USP 797, and essentially it says that the compounding personnel doing category 2 have to do every 6 months, but the people that are providing oversight that do not compound are every 12 months. So they still have to demonstrate competency, they just don't have to demonstrate it as a higher frequency because they aren't compounding. I would actually very much, just because from the fundamental principle that pharmacists should demonstrate competency in the thing that they are supervising, that I think it would not be appropriate to strike the individuals that are providing direct oversight. Now, if we did want to make a differentiation between those that are just checking a product and those pharmacists that are providing oversight, which those are not the same things, we can do that. And that's actually in USP 797 and does provide for policies and procedures for those individuals. But if I'm a pharmacist that's checking it, so for example, if I think of a traditional basic clean room setup, right? I'm the pharmacist, I am checking things, but I'm also overseeing those technicians, right? I am the live person that is making sure that those technicians are doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. That person absolutely 100% uncompromisingly must be competent in sterile compounding and routinely have to demonstrate that.
Need input from everybody else. I do so the SOPs is in there. That's where 573 comes in, line 573. That's what you just referenced. So I think that takes care of that part of it because it's talking about those that it says do not compound nor have direct oversight. So we need to rectify between these two ideas to see where we go.
I mean, if the pharmacy's SOP defines who shall have to do the evaluations and then who does not, that would be backup if an inspector walked in and looked at a stack of sterile logs and saw a pharmacist's signature, the last signature, and that they are not doing media fill tests just because that's their job is to sit and look at a vial and check labeling, that they, they don't get in trouble for that. So allowing the SOPs to define that it helps.
So I think it would be important to separate the two, and I think that's the reason they separated it with USP 797 because it's problematic now. I will say that there is a differentiation. So if we look at lines 633 through 635, well, 634, I guess, because 635 is crossed out. But if we look at line 633, it does differentiate that the media fill testing happens at a 6-month interval for compounding personnel. But it's worded a little funky, but basically the intent here is that every 12 months, the person supervising compounding personnel and compounding personnel are being tested every 12 months, with the exception of the compounding personnel every 6. It reads a little funky, but I remember we rearranged this wording at a previous board meeting to address that. Now, if we wanted to address the issue that Jenny's discussing, that's separate. So that would be the person that is doing kind of a final verification check, or maybe it's even a person that's doing some sort of remote in-process check or something like that. That's a very different thing, and you could leave that in the SOPs, and that's actually what USP 797 has. But we would simply need to add that as a definition, or add that as a section in here. And we could probably honestly copy the wording out of USP 797. It's a short blurb, I believe.
So Jenny, going back to yours, so if you look at 641, it talks about a personnel who have direct oversight of compounded personnel but do not compound. So that's where you're talking about the gloved fingertip, correct?
That and in the media fill section.
Which is on 653. Sterile sampling media devices shall be used to sample the gloved fingertips. Is that what you're?
Yeah, there's several places.
Okay.
It's again on 659.
So what is the pleasure of the board when we've got two different ideas in this one space? We need to come to a consensus or recommendation as to.
I was going to refer it back to staff to come up with some verbiage, but.
And we can do that. But I think that they may need a little bit more direction.
I think we do need a little bit more direction because it sounds, are you saying that, because we have a differentiation between direct oversight but do not compound, and then people who have no direct oversight nor do they compound. So are you saying that we need to define which one the in-process checks and the final verification fall into?
There is I'm looking for the section, but you could, it basically talks about, there's somewhere in here where it says that according to SOPs, you can do the, it includes people that are, it uses restocking as an example, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You could probably include in there restocking or pharmacists that are only doing final verification of a product or whatever that lingo is. I don't think we
So
need to
if
send that
you
back
look-
to staff. I think
If
that's
you'll look with me, on 573 is where that starts. And it says the pharmacy's SOPs shall define the aseptic technique evaluation for personnel who do not compound nor have direct oversight of compounding personnel, such as personnel who restock or clean and disinfect the sterile compounding area, personnel who perform in-process checks or final verification of
so
compounded
it is
sterile
there.
preparations, and others, and then it gives the example like maintenance personnel, certifiers, contractors, inspectors, surveyors. So does that accomplish what we're trying to
that
get?
does.
Okay.
That does.
I just assumed it wasn't there since we were talking about it. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Okay, so while we're in kind of this same section, I had a question.
We're in definitions, so yeah.
We're in definitions, yeah. There's a definition that's
Or personnel.
listed here for designated persons, and I could be wrong, but I could not find where it was referenced in the rest of the chapter. Is it mentioned anywhere else? Randy, are you?
Where do you see?
The definition is on 281.
So 281 reads, designated persons, one or more individuals assigned to be responsible and accountable for the performance and operation of the pharmacy and personnel as related to the preparation of compounded sterile preparations.
No, Jenny, it's not referenced anywhere else in the rule. It might have been in a previous draft and we just didn't
Okay.
strike out the definition.
Do we need it? Does it help to have that for those who do want to follow USP 797? Does it? So are you
I
okay
think
omitting that?
just for context, I think the intent there is that they wanted someone that is at the facility that is expert in sterile compounding that is responsible for the program. I don't know that it adds anything from a regulatory perspective, and especially if we're not referencing it anywhere else, because ultimately it's going to come back to the PIC regardless of if they delegate that activity. They have chosen to delegate that activity. It falls under the pharmacist responsibility. So I don't think it harms anything.
So we could strike that just to eliminate some space.
Does anybody have any objection to striking that definition if it's not going to be used? Because you're right, everything goes back to the PIC.
Mm-hmm.
No objections on this side? None on this side? All right, we will strike that definition at 281. All right, so back to personnel. So we're okay with what we have.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we are going to go then to operational standards.
Well,
What?
back to on line 578 on media field test. So this is about common ownership. And so this is allowing category 1 and category 2, if a common ownership, they can share their data with regard to media fills. Why wouldn't we just allow all of them, category 1, 2, or 3, share data? And, why delineate out category 1?
What line are we at again? Sorry.
It starts at 578.
She's saying at 579, why would we not have category 1, 2, or 3? I think it's because and Iman, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was existing language that the change was it was already low and medium risk. That's what it was prior. This is just changing the definition to match. So we went category 1 or 2.
Right, and because there's 2 forms of category 2.
Right.
So, I'll go on the record, I'm not for sharing data, regardless. I think every facility needs to have their own data, but just a comment, why not let them all share data? I don't even know of any category 3s that have a common ownership.
There's no reason not to.
Yeah. No reason not to
Include
share.
category 3 in that.
Yeah.
Thoughts? I see no dissension with anybody. Okay. So 579 we'll add.
And then while we're on media fills, I would like to add just a little verbiage that says the most challenging or stressful. So must be conducted at each pharmacy under the most challenging and stressful conditions for wherever it would fit in with media fills. I think it's, there's several different areas for that. Some between 578 and 596, there's a couple of spots that could use that verbiage.
So you're saying at 578 and 590, or?
Yeah, 578, media fill tests shall be conducted on compounding personnel at each pharmacy under the most challenging or stressful conditions. And then it's again on 599. And then again on
It looks like that
610.
language already exists, unless there's a spot that's missing. So it looks like on line 582.
Yeah, it mentions it once. I was just trying to expand it.
Oh, since there's
Make
the
it-
separate section down there
yeah.
on G.
So just repeat the language
Mm-hmm.
down in G. Are we okay with H? Where it says it shall be manipulated in a manner that simulates sterile to sterile compound activities. Are we okay with that, or are you saying it should
I
go
think
there
we should
too?
put the most challenging or stressful conditions there as well. Because then it's in the non-sterile to sterile section also. H and I.
So rather than playing whack-a-mole with that, do you want to just put it, maybe like move it to a different spot? So I think it first start talking about, that way it applies to all of them just in kind
Right.
of one.
Right. That's
So
good.
probably just move the language that's in F up to E, I think. Does E cover everything? Asking staff. If we were to put lingo there.
What line are you on?
It'd be 567. So somewhere in that paragraph, I think so it mentions practical tests and media fill testing should be done. And then you could make a statement in there that, let's see, compounding personnel should not evaluate their own assay technique, et cetera, et cetera. And then after the testing statements on 573 before the inserted language, we insert the phrase that media fill testing should be, what's the exact lingo they use? Shall be conducted under the most challenging and stressful conditions, or should simulate the most challenging and stressful conditions.
So, question for you all. If you're expanding F to be all of the pharmacies, right?
Yeah,
Then that
would
means
eliminate.
G would need to go away because G is not that. So you're striking out G because of the expansion that you're doing to F. So F will then cover all pharmacies. So the language that you have in there about most challenging and stressful conditions would then apply to all pharmacies, if I'm reading it correctly.
So correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm hearing is not that you want it expanded necessarily to all pharmacies, but that you want it expanded to all media tests every time media tests.
Yeah,
are done.
that's the normal verbiage with regard to media fills.
Yeah, I think I see what Megan's saying though. So like if we're having that same, because the primary difference between F and G is pretty insignificant, except for what we were talking about, which is the most stressful conditions. And then there's also the statement about common ownership, which we're wanting that to be applicable to all pharmacies compounding any of the three categories, right? So if we simply, on F, where it says where an individual compounds sterile preparations, we just eliminate, actually we would eliminate category 1 or 2 from that line and then eliminate G, and that would fix all the issues, I think. Is that what you're suggesting, Megan?
That was my suggestion.
Yep.
If
I think
it
that's
accomplishes
brilliant.
what you want.
Does that, any reason not to do it that way? Donna, Donnie? All right, so does that, you got that? Okay.
We're going to surface sampling.
And we're still within personnel, so is there anything else within, I'm sorry, we're in the operational standards. So, yeah, we can go on down to surface if there's nothing above that.
Okay.
What lines are we talking through?
I think,
Surface sampling's like 686.
yes, starting, I'm looking at 720, 718.
Where it starts for pharmacies compounding category 1 or 2, compounded sterile preparations.
And the problem I have with this one is category 1 and 2 to do it monthly. But then there are those category 2s that compound from bulk API, which technically really should be in with category 3. So I was going to suggest to leave Cat 1 as doing it monthly and change Cat 2 to weekly. Or do we need to separate out the two different category 2s?
I think where the difference is, I'm trying to remember it, and we didn't have USP 797 loaded, so I didn't get a chance to look at that. But I'm trying to remember the difference between our Cat 2 non-sterile and our Cat 3s. Is it terminal sterilization? What's the
PUDs and less environmental monitoring and less gowning.
It's the environmental monitoring. So that would explain the variance in the BUDs you get then for the non-sterile. So if it's just so it's separated out because it enables someone to, leaving it as is, enables someone that does compound non-sterile to sterile to be able to do it without the more intensive monitoring. But they end up with shorter BUDs. So it's less restrictive, less monitoring, all that. So as is actually kind of, I think if I'm interpreting it correctly, I think it kind of helps out the little guy, So if you do have a pharmacy that is engaging in non-sterile compounding and they can't afford all the stuff, it enables them to still compound and have BUDs. They're just not as long as if you were doing all the things. That's my interpretation.
So do you see a problem, though, with like a hospital that does Cat 2s to being able to do surface plates once a week? Is that...
I mean, there's no other guidance to promote that, though. There's no industry standard document or anything like that that says that engaging in sterile to sterile requires that. It would just be more restrictive. It just makes it a
little more strict just because of a non-sterile ingredient being introduced in the air.
I kind of like what Randy's saying as far as the independence. So are you saying that there'll be a way to, I'm trying to think if there's any place else in the rules that we could pull it from, divide up category 2 so that part of category 2 would be monthly and part of category 2 would be weekly?
That would work if the board's in agreement with that. That was just a suggestion, just to have a little more safety net, a little more checking of surfaces.
I think the idea, though, is that they have I don't know many hospital pharmacies engage in non-sterile, honestly, but so there might be something out there. But I think the idea is if you left it monthly, the idea is you're doing monthly sampling, and then there's the other environmental things that are the non-sterile Cat 2s, and that is why the BUDs are shorter for the Cat 2 non-steriles, because they're not doing as intensive of environmental monitoring and testing and all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And so my assumption is that leaving the non-sterile Cat 2s as monthly, unless there's something that says we should do weekly, which I'm not sure. But I think that enables them to. It seems reasonably less restrictive on those smaller pharmacies. I don't know.
Thoughts? Suzette, Rick? Donnie?
Well, I advocate for the smaller pharmacies that really are trying to make it, and if this might help, that's a plus. And to me, for the testing to be a little less restrictive. But I understand what both of y'all are saying, but I certainly advocate for that.
So your recommendation would be to leave it currently? Megan, can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I would say that what we've already done is going to leave this so that we're bringing it back again, so we could leave it for comment as well.
Yes, if we're going to be making these amendments, we'll send it back out for a comment period.
So do you want to leave it now? And then I see a shake from Suzette, Rick. Leave as is, and then
See what comment is.
see what comment is. All right. We're still in operational standards, which takes us down again to 2089, roughly.
Which takes us down to what line, did you say?
The section is from 758 to like 2089. So I would assume that we need some discussion over 770 or starting on 769.
I think there were some really good comments that we heard today about this. I think there's probably an opportunity. I mean, if we're already modifying to do two things. So one, there were a couple comments that were made by individuals about the percentage of testing. Now, if y'all recall, that was actually a compromise we actually reached in this meeting, right? So we ended up saying that we would increase the batch yield to 750, but that the testing requirement would go to 5%. And so that was where those things came from, just for benefit of individuals that had comments about that. What I think might be an interesting approach, honestly, I liked the comments about automation. I think we talked about that. I think Danny brought that up at a previous meeting too, where we were like, well, what about like someone that's engaged in automated compounding where they're, I can't remember the statistic, but I remember being impressed by it, whoever made the comment about that, but about how fast it worked. But what if we separated the maximum batch yield and we had one number that was for manual processing, and then we had another number for use of automation or semi-automation. I think that was what someone suggested. And then we go back to the testing specifications in USP 71. And I think that would address a lot of the comments that I thought were pretty well thought today. So we move, if we're going to stick with USP 71 for the percentage testing, maybe we should stick with that batch yield cap of 250 if we're manually processing, but then we do a higher number for automation.
I think it's tricky. I think it's tricky when you're talking automation because you have different levels of automation. I mean, you have partial automation, which I don't even know what that is. Is that you automated the bulk batch bag, and then you have how are you filling the vials, or do you have each individual, would you say 50 vials per minute type of robotics thing? So I think that's what's going to be tricky, is defining what automation even is.
I think we have a definition for automated compounding device, but I'm not sure what it says. I need to scroll up and read it, but maybe that'll help.
How prevalent is automation in compounding? Do 50% of the people use it? Do 25%? Is it just the big people like they said, or is it small people?
I use it on a daily basis.
So a small independent would use something like that too.
Depending on your definition of automation, I mean, it's a repeater pump.
Yeah, like a repeater pump, which is kind of in that category, and what would meet the current definition. I mean, it's probably like $5-6 grand. So yeah, small pharmacies would own that as part of their capital investment. It's cheaper than a hood, and it does pump things quite quickly, and your contamination risk does go down. So it would be, I mean, we could adopt something around that, but yeah, it's pretty prevalent.
If you look online, I know it's jumping, but if you look on line 207, you have a definition of automated compounding device that it's previously in the rules. It's not a new definition that's been added.
And unless I'm mistaken, there are specifications throughout that say that it has to be calibrated daily. It has to be like, those are kind of peppered throughout the rules. So there are some definitions and controls there if we wanted to utilize that.
You're correct on that too. And if you want to jump down to 1175, that's where a lot of that is. It's specific to those automated compounding devices.
All right, so going back to 770. Do we come up with, go back to 250? At one point, I think the task force recommendation was 500. Do we take the task force recommendation of 500 for all preparations and then increase the final yield for those with automation?
I think if automation is that prevalent, you could make it, carve it out and have them have a higher yield and all of that. But making the other 500 for manual, if you truly are manual, maybe it does need to go back to the 250. I mean, we originally had done it for the 500, considering it was all manual. But if that's going to increase the safety and you're doing everything manually and you have, it seems like that would be relevant and carve it out for automation, seeing as most people use automation.
Yeah, they do. Those I know.
So
I don't have a problem with that. Put it out for public comment.
So we're doing 250 manual, 500 automated, or 250 total for both?
The automation would be higher. So we could do the 750, we could do 1,000. I mean, it could be higher, right? Because it's all automated.
Right.
For the most part.
It could be partial or completely.
So you're saying 250 for manual.
Right.
And 1,000 for.
If y'all think that is, I mean, I don't do sterile compounding, but it seems like like a central fill, if I'm pumping the stuff through and no one's touching it, it's automated. It's a different, you don't need to have as many checks.
I think it's worth putting out to see what everybody says.
So what are we putting out? Are we putting out the 750 for automated final yield? Or increasing it to 1,000?
Increase it to 1,000 for automation.
And when you say increase it to 1,000 for automation, is that partially automated and fully automated?
What were you thinking, Donna?
I would think that 1,000 if you're fully automated. And if you're not, then you'd have to.
Well, define fully and partial automated.
I would say if your compounding process is, you can't say all of it because you still have to manually unhook the syringe, right? So I don't know if you just say that it's primarily complete. I don't know if that's too weak or not, but basically saying that if compounding process is primarily completed using an automated compounding device, or if you got to say like 90% completed. I don't know how you'd measure that though.
The definition is not bad though on 207 that Megan pointed out. It's if it's automated that fills the individual components. You know what I mean? So if your machine or your pump is filling eaches, then that's good. Partially automated basically is you're filling your batch bag and then you're drawing it manually. That to me is partially automated to me. Sorry. So does that make sense? Like if the final product is the result of the automation, that to me is fully automated. But I don't know if
Okay,
if
so
it's
manual
worded
at 250 and
Automated.
automated at 1,000.
So just automated, no differentiation between partial or fully? I'm asking.
Or do we use the word primarily as?
Or you could say fully compounded, because I mean, I think that would count, right? Fully compounded by an automated compounding device.
fully automated compounded.
That way you don't have to create a whole new definition for just automated. You have a definition you already have the definition for automated compounding device. So you can just say that it was fully prepared using an automated compounding device.
So partially automated falls into the 250 category?
I would think so, because you're still manually drawing something up. So if you pump a batch bag and then you manually draw out of that batch bag, right?
That's a manual process. That's going to take, for 250, it's going to take at least probably a minute per. So you're talking a 4-hour shift, right? I mean, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's a 250.
Jenny had.
Yeah, so Randy, repeat what you said about the compounding process being automated.
Yeah,
What was your
basically saying
verbiage?
that. Yeah, no, you got to make sure you're not saying a robot, right? Because that's not what we're talking about. Which I think that's where we got to make sure we don't accidentally create language. So I think if we say that the preparation is fully compounded by an automated compounding device.
Okay, so that
Does that sound like a robot?
Well, no, I mean, I can see what you're trying to say with regard to like TPNs, but like if you're making something from bulk chemical, there's not an automated way to weigh that out and mix it. I mean, that's done manually. So it's the actual filling of the units or the vials or syringes that would need to be the fully automated part of it.
Calling that partial automation?
No, I'm not. He was saying fully automated compounding process, but that compounding process, the mixing part of it before it is put into the final containers, it's not automated.
You're loading a machine. You're loading like a micromix
process.
machine. You're just putting vials on there, and then it measures and it does your batch bag, and then it shoots it into the vial to eaches. So that's a fully automated. But you're right. You're gonna.
But if you're doing something from bulk chemical, you've got to weigh it and mix it and check the pH and QS and make sure it's where it's supposed to be before you put it in or filter it or whatever your process is going to be. It's the act of putting it into the final containers for sterilization.
The risk comes in, and I'm just reiterating, the risk comes in with 750 manipulations per eaches, and that's what I agree with you, Donna, that you're trying to avoid, and that's the part that's fully automated. But like she said, to make the actual big, batch of it, you have to do it by hand.
Yeah, I'm trying to see where the risk comes in. So if the risk is in the end part when you're filling, then that's where we would say
the part that would be
right,
the automated
that would
part.
be the automated. Then that would say yes, you could do more of them. If that's where the risk comes in.
And I think the other part that we need to think about is, I mean, our job is public safety. So we want to make sure that what is being produced is safe for the citizens of Texas. But we also have to keep in mind that with the verbiage and the definition we're putting forward, we need our compliance officers and inspectors to be able to understand what we're needing them to look at so that they are, when they're looking at compounders, making sure that the citizens of Texas are safe. So I guess I'm going to look at Megan and Iman to say, with the discussion we've had, is there enough that we feel like we could come up with some new language or some different language that would allow this split, or do we need to define?
I think you all not necessarily need to wordsmith the language, but I think you all need to tell us where the demarcation is between where you want it to turn over to the 1,000 and where you want it to stay at the 250. And we can get with, compliance officers and talk through the wording that accomplishes that, but we need to know where that line is. I don't think we would feel comfortable making that decision.
Is it something, Jenny, like fully automated from the primary source bag or primary source?
Packaging. It's fully automated packaging,
Oh, there you go. Makes sense.
which is in the definition of automated compounding device.
Okay.
Okay. Does that make sense?
I think it would help to put that in a sentence or like at the end of the sentence there. So like the way I'm thinking about it is at the end we'd say, except the maximum batch size shall be limited to 1,000 final yield units if fully compounded by an automated compounding device. But I think what we need is like some specific phrasing in there, or
If
change it.
packaged using an automated.
Right.
I mean, I just looked up something that says the transfer of sterile components from source containers into a final sterile container. So, I mean, kind of look at it that way too.
Are you good with that language?
Well, but in some instances, you're starting with a non-sterile, like your solution is non-sterile, and you're packaging it, either filtering it and then packaging it, or you still have to filter if you're going to do terminal sterilization on it.
So you're sterilizing it before it gets to the packaging, potentially.
No, after.
After.
Oh, after. Oh,
And sometimes during.
Yeah.
I think packaging is where we
That
add
helps. The packaging is fully automated.
Does that answer where we need to go, Iman?
I think
I'm getting.
I don't know. I think packaging might. I'm thinking about how would someone interpret that. Packaging doesn't.
Outer wrap.
Yeah, there's lots of things like that. So it probably needs to. I don't know. We don't say fully compounded. We could say primarily compounded. Do we think that would suffice? And that way, it's not. I don't know.
You guys understand what we're trying to say, right? It's when it gets into the machine that's going to go into the, right? So
Yes.
I think, can you all just find that language or wording?
Yeah, if that's your demarcation is when it gets into
Right.
the machine and
Right.
Mhm.
Instead of us trying to figure out what that wording would be.
Mhm.
Suzette's might not be far off, though, the transfer from the source to the final package.
Just leave out the sterile
Yeah,
source
part, yeah.
part because it may not be.
Okay, so staff will come up with verbiage there. Let us get through this part, and then if the board has that question, they can we'll look to call you forward. All right, so where do you want to go from here?
Line 1040.
Okay.
So both G and H, those two paragraphs are the most costly of this whole whole chapter. It's requiring antimicrobial effectiveness testing on any multi-dose in Cat 2 or Cat 3. And then it's requiring container closure system testing on multi-doses as well. This is something that we've not had to do before in Texas. It's not we've not had to do container closure or antimicrobial effectiveness testing before. So this is, I'm going to put this out there, but I think we should strike those two paragraphs.
Do we feel like by striking them, we in any way put the public at risk?
Not with the short BUDs that we have currently. You know, I could see if you wanted to extend your BUDs past what is recommended here, that you would have to do that. But for every single batch that you make, for every single formulation, I did it myself. I sat down and had a proposal, and it was quoted on just doing one preparation that I make. Actually, I make it for horses, and it, including the cost of the drug and the cost of the vials, my cost to have all of this done, except for the preservative challenge, it was $29,000. And that's not something in the veterinary world that I would have recouped the cost of. So that would be one less thing that I could make for my animal patients. So it is very expensive. So I'd like to put that out there to strike those and see what type of comments we get back.
Thoughts on that?
So I'm trying to understand the language. So on G, so as worded, so it says that it shall pass antimicrobial effectiveness testing. In the absence of supporting documentation or data, compounding personnel may rely on antimicrobial effectiveness testing conducted or contracted for once for each formulation in the particular container closure system in which it was packaged. So does that not mean that you can use previously existing data?
Only if we're going to allow pharmacies to share data.
I guess my point is once you've done the formulation, you're not doing it again, right?
Yeah,
like
but
once
you may
you've
do 100 formulations a day. I mean, it's all patient specific.
No, I meant like when you compound something for the, and I realize you've been compounding for years, but I mean, like if we were starting all of this like right now, right? Like if you compound that formulation off the get-go, like it's a one-time cost. You're not going to do it again, right? Am I interpreting that correctly?
So if you have someone who wants, progesterone, 200 milligram per mil, that's a bad example, but I'll go with it. That's one formulation. Then you have another customer who needs 150 milligram per mil. This is saying you have to do that exact same, because it's a different formulation. You have to do it for that as well. So it becomes very redundant. There's no bracketing. There's no, it's per formulation. And you may do hundreds of different formulations in a day.
But if you're doing the same concentration, you do different volumes, it would be okay, right? So I mean, like, I know that I'm with you on the example, but so I guess my point being is that it's that one-time testing, and the idea here is that if we're creating a multiple dose compounded preparation, and it has that longer BUD, and one of the challenges with the multi-dose preparation is it's being re-entered by the patient with sometimes better technique, sometimes not as good a technique. And the idea is that the formulation will prevent or mitigate potential antimicrobial contamination of that solution. So, and we use lots of different preservatives, right? Just for everybody else's education, we use so many different preservatives depending on the formulation and compatibility and things like that. So I would think we would want to test to make sure that that combination with that drug and that volume with that concentration of preservative would actually mitigate the mitigate microbial contamination, right? So I think that's the idea. So I mean, if I'm hearing you right, I mean, yeah, you would be making a new master formulation record, and you'd have to validate that and do all the things. This would be an extra step in validating that formula.
Mm-hmm.
And the closure integrity is kind of the same thing. So if I have, and I think that again, you could use the data on this, and so I don't think this one is formula. It does say for each formulation.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So
that one may actually be more worthwhile validating the actual container closure and not specific to formulation, I would think, just because again, you're injecting over and over and over again. And I don't know about you, but I've seen some pretty cheap membranes in my time for injection. So it might actually be worthwhile.
Well, the issue too with container closure is, like you said, you can make a different concentrate or the same concentration but a different size. Once you change your size, there's another volume, another vial that you have to do a container closure on.
So while you're thinking, going back to your comment earlier about scratching G and H based upon the shorter BUDs, we did make some adjustments to BUDs from the original. So do we need to go back and look at shortening those? Or do you feel like the BUDs that are in there
I feel like the ones that are there
are adequate?
I do have concerns with the idea of extending the BUD beyond what is proposed in the rules when the BUD is based on the BUD that is presented by USP in that scenario is predicated on these things happening. So if we're not doing these things and we're extending the BUD, I feel like we're going in a very opposite direction.
But if USP did all of that when they did that monograph, then why can't you use that data?
So your comment was good question, if I can read lips well enough.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'd have to double check, but I think in USP they actually do make provisions for whenever it's based on a monograph, whereas we just don't have it here. But I have to go back and look at what the provisions are.
And then what happens?
And that's why they have their monograph.
When I go to order vials again from my vendor and they've changed their vendor, am I required to then redo it?
I mean, if their vial might be terrible, I would think so.
See, so it gets into the area of GMP world and manufacturing and away from, just taking care of my little 6-year-old patients with pedigree syndrome.
Well, speaking frankly, though, I mean, I think we're getting closer and closer to GMP rule as we continue to expand the BUDs beyond what is compounding, closer to what a manufacturer puts on their expiration dates.
We're not asking near 2 years.
We've gotten up to 6 months on some of this stuff.
Which
that's a fourth of the way to a fully manufactured product without near the regulation.
I disagree.
All right, so Jenny's suggestion is that we strike G and H. Randy has made some reservations with it. Thoughts?
We can operate in a safe and sanitary environment without the expense of those two. G and H.
So you think we have enough other definitions, processes, things in here that will mandate to people to operate in a safe environment? Because you may be safe. I just want to make sure everybody is safe.
Well, that's kind of why I wanted Cat 2 non-steriles to do more surface sampling.
Okay, so then, because I don't want to take this out if somebody could just bypass based on, you know, what we have in there now. So if we need to go back and make that more, you know, stricter with the surface and all of that, so that we could take these out. I just don't want to take something out and there's people out there who don't necessarily do what they have to do because it's not written in black and white, you know?
Right.
So I'd want to make sure that we had something else somewhere that would say, yes, but we have all these things that are covering us on that. If you think we do, or we need to go back and strengthen something else, then I would be okay with taking it out. But
I think the way we have Category 3 set up with environmental monitoring and personnel monitoring is very strict. It's way more than what we've have required in the past.
and what about the 2s that you were talking about?
Yeah, that was just that one little tweak was the only thing that I would suggest. And
so G&H are more about what I hear what we're saying, and we're talking about rigor of control in the pharmacy. G&H are very applicable to what occurs outside the pharmacy after the drug is dispensed. We're talking about the integrity of the product after it's we're talking about a multi-dose container where the integrity of the product is being multiple times injected by the patient. And then we're also talking about the preservative that's in place that's designed to prevent microbial contamination for that product to be kept potentially at room temperature for a very long time. Now, if this is a multi-dose container, as we all know, multi-dose containers, re-entry and into that product over and over increases that contamination risk. So that's the point of this. It's not about whether the pharmacy has good processes. This is about making sure the product can withstand what happens in the world after the drug has been dispensed.
But there is all data, sorts of data out there on preservatives and the percentage of preservatives used in different scenarios that have been studied over and over again, that if you hit those ranges, you have a preserved entity. I mean, I don't want to just throw all that data out the window.
We could probably explore provisions for, like, if there is a USP-defined monograph or something along those lines. Like, I think that's reasonable, but I don't think the right solution is to completely strike this. I think that if we do want to include provisions, we could include provisions that are reasonable and maintain the public safety. And to your point, don't throw out a bunch of data that already exists, right? But I think that, I think that part of this too, though, is the reason they're doing it per package is also, it's not just what's going into the product, it's how it's being introduced into the product too. So it's kind of that combo. So I don't know, but I don't think striking it completely is really the right answer. I think that having some type of provision that addresses previously existing scientific data is reasonable. But I don't have a specific language I would propose just because I'd like to do some homework on that.
Hey, Jenny, can I ask just a clarifying question? So like in F and in a hospital, when you enter a multi-dose vial, you have 28 days. You date it for 28 days. So in a retail setting or in an outpatient, you compound a multi-dose vial and you counsel the patient. Do you tell them to use it for 28 days and then you put a 28-day VUD on it, or recommend 28 days, or how do you do that once it's entered, the vial's entered by the patient?
There's a lot of different scenarios there, and there's the vet world and the human world. On the vet world, what I make for my customers and for my vet animals, my vet patients rather, they're in and out of that vial. They use it up pretty quick. I mean, they'll use it up within a month.
But there's no guarantee.
But it may sit. It may be an antidote that they have sitting on their shelf that they may need to have a longer date on it so that they can use it when they need it, but not puncture it until day 62.
And the language will still remain in there, as in what you're saying. So on 1039, that it's not used for longer than a signed beyond use date,
Right.
28 days, whichever is short.
And that's also reiterated in the definition of multi-dose. So eliminating G and H wouldn't eliminate F. It would just eliminate like that first sentence of F, I think.
So I'm going to ask Megan and Iman a question because I want to set us up for success with our next meeting. So we can't, if we put it out to the public for comments on removing G&H and we don't remove it or make the recommendation to remove it now, but then we remove it in August, we'll be bringing it back in November.
Correct.
So it would make sense, so think this through with me, to possibly remove the language now, let it come back for comment, and then if it's removed, it could go forward. If we put it back in, we would still be at the November.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you leave it in now and put it out for comment, bring it back to the next meeting and decide to leave it in again, you don't have to do anything. If you leave it in now, go to the next meeting, decide to take it out, we're going to have to go back out. And vice versa. If you take it out now, decide the next meeting to take it out, you're good. If you take it out now, decide the next meeting that you want to put it back in, probably going back out.
So the reason why I asked that question is I want to make sure that each of us think through where you lie on this and where you think it may go, so that we make either way it could change. So know that. But I'd like for it to be in a form where we think that that's where it's going to go.
Julie, did we have any comments about this at any of these?
Not directly. There are comments about the cost.
Yes, I understand.
And how, we heard that a couple of different times. That cost is a factor, but it did not specifically call out G&H as being that they should be stricken.
So if we were to take out G&H and all the comments about cost, does this get rid of all those comments, or there's other places in here that they still have to do things? So
That helps tremendously.
So when we did our analysis, or whoever did the analysis of how much it costs or not costs, it seems like the costs that are coming back are way higher than what we have projected.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get our costs?
We got our costs by reaching out, and some of it was from their task force members, and then some of it was, what we could get directly from providers. If you remember, you did ask some of the commenters to please provide the data on where their costs were coming from, and we received no data from any commenter backing up, the elevated costs that they had presented.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm getting at, is that, again, everybody said that, but every time I have asked, can somebody please give me the costs? No one turns in their paperwork. Now, you got it now, so we have something now, but nobody else who has come forward and said 2 million, 1 million, whatever, no one has brought us substantiated information, and that's what we need.
And in our analysis, I was actually looking for that very thing when you brought it up. In our analysis, we list $1,000 per formulation for a method suitable test for antimicrobial effectiveness testing. And for that to be like I would assume that would be a lifetime testing for that product. So I don't see that as, when you add up all the other costs and put everything together, I don't see that as prohibitive if that number is correct.
Well, you have a method suit for sterility, and then you have to do a method suit for endotoxin. So there's two different method suits you have to do. And that's true for that vial size.
Now, endotoxin in the section we were just talking about, though, right?
No.
Okay.
No, but it part of cost analysis and the whole thing that there's two of those. And I think maybe too where our cost analysis didn't include the actual cost of the drugs in the vials that were being tested.
I would think in most cases that wouldn't bump that up a whole heck of a lot, though.
It would depend.
I mean, yeah, it would depend, but when we think about the wide range of drugs that we use for compounding, I mean that, I would say by and large, most of them are a lot more cost effective than some others that are going to incur a major cost. I guess my point being is that like we're talking about striking two elements of what is used or what was factored in whenever an expert panel came up with BUDs. We have already chosen to go with longer BUDs. So now we are going with longer BUDs and we are removing elements that were used to factor in what BUD they would be achieving. And if $1,000 is indeed true, I mean, compared to the other things in here, I don't see how that's I don't see that as a major barrier. I just don't.
Well, the method suit quote for my little project that I was looking into, it was $16,000.
Big difference.
And I'd be happy to pass this around if y'all want to look at this proposal.
All right, so I go back to my question on G and H. Jenny's recommendation is we strike those two and then take it out to comment. Or do we leave it and take it out to comment?
I think what either you or someone in the audience that spoke mentioned, the least restrictive to operate in a safe and sanitary environment. So I choose to omit them and get comment.
Donnie? Microphone.
Thank you. I just know that we're going to probably end up back in the same spot once we send it out for comment. And if we leave it, we still may have to come back to this point. I don't know. I'm kind of both ways, but certainly advocate saving money for every small provider. That's what I call these pharmacies. So I know I'm kind of conflicted on whether to take them out or leave them in.
I don't want to be super restrictive and, inhibit people from having pharmacies and all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we have to weigh the risk and the safety of people. And I feel like we need to leave it in and see if we get the comments, just because there are people who are not going to follow the rules if we're less restrictive. So I think it's the least restrictive and safe, but it needs to be able to apply to everybody in that way. So I think people get out of doing something and say, well, it doesn't say there that I have to do it, kind of thing, and then it's an unsafe product. I mean, there's people like you that are doing the right thing, but there's people out there with this whole compounding, explosion of things that are taking advantage of that right now. And I just hate to see somebody get hurt because of that.
Bradley? All right, Suzette?
Keep it in, but if there's a way we could potentially soften the impact with, if there's existing data that can be utilized to determine, whether it's appropriate or not, maybe that could be added in here to provide some relief for, each formulation having to be tested, et cetera, or each container having to be tested.
Mr. Tisch? Bradley will come back to you.
No, it does not. To your point, Rick, I think there will probably be a motion, but it'll probably be towards the end.
Yeah, for the
Because it feels like there's going to be more conversation.
Can we add something on the data that both Suzette and Randy have brought up, like to soften that? On, using monographs that are available and things like that. Could we put that in there to get a compromise?
rather than requiring individuals to do the testing themselves.
I mean, if you can find the data and it's validated, then I don't see why you would not take that. I mean, if you make up your own stuff, well, that's a different story.
Your microphone.
There's not going to be a piece of documentation on every single container closure system. Because there's syringes, there's, all sorts of different containers. I don't know how we would soften it.
Actually, there usually is. We actually got data on syringes from different manufacturers many years ago whenever Puerto Rico got hit, and we had to compound a lot of syringes and those types of things. So they actually do have
there
data.
are in like in Tristles different syringes for that, but I've not seen any data in different vials, between all the different manufacturers of empty sterile vials.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Like, I mean, for the most part, I mean, so let's say you, if you're compounding a variety of products, you may use the same container closure system for those. In fact, you usually will, right? Because you're going to buy in bulk when you can, where you can. So if you can use the same container closure for multiple products, you do that. If you've done it once, you've done it, is my understanding of the intent of this. And so I don't know that, I mean, this one does say, formulation. I think that could be tweaked, but I think that I don't think it's not like we're going to use like all the vials on the planet, but if we got a new vial from a new manufacturer, we would probably want to test that. Yeah. I know we did some repackaging on some vials at one point, and we actually did, we did check after multiple sticks with it, and that bad boy leaked pretty quickly, and that was from a reputable manufacturer that shall not be named publicly.
So you would have to eliminate on each formulation and on fill volume.
That's what I was going to say. So it would say conducted or contracted for the particular container closure system, period, and take out the for once for each formulation, and then in which it was packaged, in which it will be packaged. I think that gets to what you're trying to do, and it allows, if they've got supporting documentation or data, they can use that. They don't have to test. Would that change?
And there might be language you can propose for both that would be suitable and I can't think of where it's at, and it may not even be in this chapter, but in another chapter. But, you could probably delineate it to be, you have your previously conducted data, like you've already assessed it, right? And then you have your USP level monograph. So by I don't know what the appropriate legal term is for USP and all the people that do those types of things. And then manufacturer provided data, because a lot of times the manufacturer will actually provide you with closure info.
Does that track with kind of what you're looking at?
Yeah, if it would free up some of that, each formulation and fill volume, and to share data or utilize, data that's there. As you mentioned earlier, kind of looking at it from like an inspection perspective, what would be asked? What type of data would be asked for? And do we need to define that, or I guess that's just give instruction?
So
down
Iman,
the road?
did you track that? So we would leave G and H in, but we would change it so that G would say something along the lines, in the absence of supporting documentation or data, compounding personnel may rely on antimicrobial effectiveness testing conducted or contracted in the particular container closure system. So we're taking out each formulation. And then in H, it's again in the absence of data. The container closure integrity test shall be conducted only once in the particular container closure system in which the multiple dose compounded sterile preparation shall be packaged.
In the interest of preventing bad actors, I would suggest specifying where you can get that data from, which we have that in other parts of the rules. Like, I think that it would be reasonable for it to be there's the statement already in there that's conductor contracted. So it's been done directly. So we have direct access to that data. I would specify, by USP monograph and from manufacturer, because, a lot of times there's, I'll give you an example that's not as relevant to this, but I think it makes the point. It's interesting because someone will say, yeah, we have data to compound this product in here. And you find some study in some low-level journal that says, yeah, we compounded this and we gave it. And that's what they use. And then try and tell you that it should get a, 30-day beyond use date. So I think it would be important to specify the sources to prevent bad actors.
And just to reiterate, to make sure we're understanding, so those sources would be USP monograph, manufacturer, or ones that they have conducted or contracted on their own.
Okay. All right, we're still in operational standards.
I have a issue with line 1116. Not an issue, just a recommendation, rather. If we added the word mean before temperature and before humidity, for it to read, be maintained at a mean temperature of 20 degrees Celsius or cooler and at a mean humidity of 60% or below, would help out those pharmacies that are located in a more humid area, like along the coast and in Northeast Texas. For any time, like when there's a change in weather and then the humidity goes up to 61 for 5 or 10 minutes, and then until the AC can recover and bring it back down to 60 or below, rather. It just helps for those little offsets here and there and not be penalized for a 1-minute excursion. And it's on there, and then it's again on line 1554.
So if we say mean, that means that if they have one reading of 40 degrees Celsius and another reading of 0 degrees Celsius, they would be in compliance. So we probably need some guardrails on that if we were to do something like that. I do know that the point of the humidity at higher levels will promote microbial contamination and growth, particularly fungal. The temperature, I think that's 65 degrees Fahrenheit, if I remember right. I think primary reason for that is mostly around preventing contamination, but also the operator thing. I think it would be, if you're wanting to accomplish something like that, I think it would be more reasonable to include a clause on what's a reasonable excursion versus trying to make a mean and or saying, so anyway, I would probably be more apt to address an excursion and what level of excursion needs immediate addressing versus not if that's not already addressed in the rules.
Okay, so how would you word that?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't. I would probably leave it the same as it is right now. Because people have excursions all the time right now, and they explain that variance and they take action on that variance. So that already kind of occurs. So I don't know. I don't individually see it as a need that needs to be addressed. I will say that I've had a clean room that's on an external wall in Texas in the summer heat, and you do have to increase your humidity in there to keep the temperature below 20. And so after enough excursions, we bought a glycol chiller because it doesn't require you to increase the humidity. So the equipment and tools exist to be able to mitigate this. But yeah, so I think that's the challenge of being anywhere where there's an external wall in Texas, just because the heat gets so high.
Well, it is it does get hot and it does get very humid here, and it does take a lot for some of the ACs to recover. And I think that would help out the small guys too. And they have been a few complaints to me about the from an inspection process about being dinged because it got up to 61 or 62 for just a little bit. And so adding the word mean kind of alleviated. I mean, if we need to put in, a time frame or to define an excursion, I'm fine with that. But I think we need to give a little ease on some of the coastal communities.
So if we put in the word mean and then added an excursion not exceeding X number of minutes?
Minutes or percent of humidity or temperature?
Yeah, I don't know.
Hey Randy, how much was the recovery when you said there was a variance in this humidity levels? You said that it was recovering. How long does that normally take? How long would it normally take in a exterior wall building?
Yeah, it can vary. I mean, it's obviously going to depend on your building and those types of things. Usually, I've seen excursions that you can mitigate pretty quickly that shouldn't necessarily impact your operations of less than 30 minutes.
Okay.
But again, that's also, so what I would say probably we would need to take into account is the duration of the excursion. I would say no more than 30 for sure. And if we want to go less, we could go less. 15 minutes maybe, I don't know. But the temperature that, sorry, I lost my thought. So you also wouldn't want the excursion to be too high, right? So for example, if I have a pharmacy and my AC unit shuts down, like if it goes on the fritz, which that never happens, right? Basically, like we have to stop operations, and it's critical to stop operations, especially if there's any visible moisture. Now, technically, you can go to segregated compounding pharmacy rules, so you don't have to stop compounding. So, like if it's immediate patient need and that type of thing, you still compound. You just have to give a very restrictive beyond use state as long as your hood's functioning. But the humidity presence, I mean, if you got visible moisture, if you were down for 5 minutes or 30 minutes or 2 hours or 5 hours and you have visible moisture, it doesn't matter how long you were down. Like you need to terminally clean that space. So I think that you would probably want to specify, if we were to specify a time range of excursion, we would probably want to specify a time range of excursion and also a degree of variance too. So you'd probably want not to go too far off of the 60%, honestly.
Yeah, nothing above 65 for sure.
Yeah, I'd say just to keep it simple rather than doing both the percentage and the humidity. If you wanted to do something here, then we could, I would say, do it as a percentage. And do it as a, no more than a 10% variance for no longer than 15 to 30 minutes. I don't know, something like that. I mean, that's just kind of eyeballing just from functionality cleaner. I will say, though, this is, aside from the fact that we're changing it from being of 60 or below, I mean, this is not a change in language, and this has been in play for
a long time.
11 years at this point.
It's been
12 years.
It's been on your bucket list.
One week for sterile. Yeah, to fix.
Okay, so I think that Randy had a maybe a solution here in allowing us to put in the word mean, but then putting a above or below.
A 10% excursion on temperature and humidity not to exceed 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Or whatever.
And I don't even think you need to put mean in there if you do that at that point.
Right.
In fact, you probably wouldn't want to because below doesn't matter. It's more the above that's the concern. Depending on how cold you get, I guess.
Okay, so leave out the word mean and put in this new language. 10%, no more than 30 minutes.
We'll see how
Okay.
it comes back.
Okay. All right, we're getting closer to records, which is 2090. Where do we go next?
Wait a minute. Well, I think did we
What are you looking
go
at?
over BUDs?
No,
Did
you
we?
they were skipped.
Hey, Julie, I think we went past the 1141 and the 1147 strikeouts. I don't know if staff captured that or not. Because I know we were going to hit that when we came back to it.
I thought they got it.
I don't think you decided whether or not you wanted to do it.
Okay.
So we have down what Randy's suggestion was, but I don't think you all discussed whether or not you wanted to go with that suggestion.
Okay, so going back to what we have looked at before, definitions, 1141 to 1143 and 1147, the outdated language. Was everybody in agreement that we should go ahead and have staff look at removing that? I see yes. Okay,
Yep.
so that, thank you for taking us back there. Sorry about that. Did you find it, Jenny?
I did. So, okay, so this has to do with beyond use states. So last meeting, we put in for category 3 in a non-aqueous dosage form. And in that verbiage, that sentence starts on 1398. What we didn't give anything to category 2 in a non-aqueous dosage form. So I was going to suggest that we just kind of mimic that, but drop the BED down on the category 2.
Okay, so 1398 is what you're wanting to mimic.
Somewhere around.
And category 2 starts on 1367.
Yes. So maybe after 1384.
So do you want the beyond usage date to be the same then?
No, less than, because it's less environmental monitoring.
I know, that's why I was asking. So what do you want it to be?
I'm just going to throw 90 out there.
Sold.
Did you say sold?
Is that what you said? Okay. Iman, did you get that? Okay. Did anybody, I should ask, did anybody have any qualms about adding that into the category 2?
Refrigerated or room temperature or 90 days refrigerated?
Oh, what did we?
Oh, it's not aqueous.
It's not aqueous. somewhere in the category 3 BUD area. And it was mentioned by a couple of people today about a carve out for small volumes. And so our current language, not this current proposed, but what we currently go by is testing anything greater than 25, and we're currently allowed to anything less than 24. We don't have to test. So with the category 3, I would make a suggestion that we provide a avenue to make less than 24 without let me just suggested verbiage. In the presence of documented published data supporting stability, aseptically processed or terminally sterilized compounded sterile aqueous preparations in batch sizes less than 24 without sterility and endotoxin testing shall have a beyond use date of not more than blank days at room temp, blank days at 90, or if refrigerated, and 120 or blank for a freezer, for us to fill in those blanks. I will say, I want to put this out there. There have been more and more vendors who supply bulk APIs. If they know that they are being used in sterile products, they do the endotoxin testing on that powder, because once you have a powder that's contaminated, you can't use it. There's no way to get rid of the endotoxin. It's just for FYI that is out there. You still have to manipulate those with depyrogenated equipment to keep it endotoxin free, or reduce your load rather. So allowing a category 3 with the extra environmental monitoring, the extra personnel competency requirements, the extra garbing that goes along, to allow these smaller pharmacies to continue to do small batch sizes without all the testing would be very helpful.
Is 24 the current?
Greater than 25 is the verbiage, I think is what it said.
Is that the right number?
I would say less than 24, 24 or less, whatever our attorneys.
If we're looking at the current, like if we compare this to current language though, so the beyond use dates are much shorter, right? And so I think that essentially that 25, in this case, like most of what, before would have been done if it was less than 25, if we weren't to do it, it would fall into what would now be category 2 non-sterile, right? So they could still do those things. They just end up with a shorter beyond use date because they aren't doing any type of testing. Now, the difference here, though, I would point out, whenever we talk about like what we were just talking about earlier about the antimicrobial effectiveness testing versus sterility testing, which are different things, right? So the key here is that when you're doing sterility testing, it's all about that batch. There's no evidence that supports that individual will compound without introducing any type of contamination ever, any time, right? So the whole point of doing the antimicrobial testing is to allow for that extended beyond use date because you have tested for, or sterility testing, because you have tested for sterility, right? So I don't know that evidence really plays into that. And for those that are compounding, for basically anybody that's compounding any amount that's not wanting to do the sterility testing and tox testing, they still get the very generous beyond use dates that are on category 2 right now, which I think they're either the same or they're better than what our current rules are, I think, right?
But you're saying move if somebody's going to do smaller batch sizes
in category 3
to make them category 3, so that there's
more environmental monitoring.
Yeah.
More monitoring.
So it kind of gives a little bit more precaution taken with it, but they're not having to go through a test.
But they're getting the same BUDs though. That's the concern I have. They're still getting the same BUDs as somebody that is doing sterility testing on the back end. So if we look at, like, for example, sterility testing standards in the USP 71, those do go down below 25.
What would prevent me from just doing 100 batches of 24?
Your inspector.
I mean,
You could put a single formulation can't be done more than X number of times in a month. I mean, you could put something in there if that's the concern you're looking at.
But Jenny, I thought you were thinking more of a smaller provider that would only do 24. They wouldn't be doing.
They may do 1 or 2, or they may do 12. It just depends on what it is and which human or animal is going in.
Like your vet side.
Yeah, what Danny's trying to say is, do we need to put some language in there so there's not a loophole? Because I could see that loophole too.
Like, how would you word that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm.
Yeah.
That's why I said, could it be without, and the bat, that particular formulation or bat, couldn't be repeated within, I don't know, 3 days, 5 days, because that would allow you not to be able to do 5 batches of 25 in the same day at the same drug. I know where you're going, and I like where you're going, but I also know what he just said opens up a big, huge loophole that we need to figure out how to close.
the inspector can't do anything about it if it's not in there.
So is there language that you could recommend, or that you all could look at and investigate, see what we could do?
I guess you'd have to tell us what the limitation is that you would want to put there. What is a reasonable number of less than 24 batches that they could do, and within what time frame?
I mean, it's so variant. I mean, it's, what if, like, this morning I got a call and my vet needs apomorphine and he needs 5 mils. So I made 1 5 mil and sent it to him. And then that afternoon I get another one that calls. Does that mean, I've already done one today, I can't do one more?
I think that's what I'm asking is
Yeah,
what would be a reasonable
there's
limitation
so
there?
many different variations on that. I'd really have to think about how to capture that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it seems like you're all in agreement that Danny's scenario there is unreasonable.
Right. It's valid.
Yeah,
It
so
is
I don't
valid.
think
I just don't know
staff
how
on their
you would-
own can figure out where that reasonableness is. I think that's y'all as subject matter experts are going to have to tell us where you think it is.
I just want to go back to the fundamentals of this, though. I just really want to point this out, just very black and white. We are talking about giving a 4-month beyond use date to an item that has not undergone any type of sterility testing from that batch.
No, I said blank. I accidentally said a number, but I said
she didn't
blank.
put
I didn't put
Okay,
that. I
so
didn't
maybe
put that-
something in between. So we're not just saying,
No, no.
I misunderstand that. So we're not saying, just to make sure I understand, so we're not saying that they would get the same beyond use dating as the Cat 3 that underwent sterility testing.
No, what she had said was that we would move it to Cat 3, we would establish what those BUDs are. But then what Danny is saying is we need additional language to close that loophole.
Okay.
So I'm going to say it is 103, and I've heard at least one person say that we need a break. Can we go till 1:15 and have break? All right, we'll go ahead and adjourn then until 1:15. Again, we're in the operational standards. We had last addressed line 1116. And just as reference, operational standards goes from 758 to 2089. So you know where we're at. What is the pleasure of the board? Where should we go next?
Well, we're talking about the small volumes.
That's where we need to finish the small volumes.
Danny was coming up with verbiage for a loophole.
I don't know if I have a recommendation, but I know for sure that that's a way to avoid testing. You know, so if somebody's, if you want to make a batch, if you want to make 500, then you just make multiple batches of 24. So I don't know what it's going to look like.
I may be proposing a very unpopular idea, but just recognizing the time and how much time we spent on each line and how much time we've spent on this overall, I feel like a lot of the changes we've made, while I think they're good changes, there's a phrase I've heard a lot that I really like, which is don't let perfect get in the way of good. And I feel like we've spent so much energy on this. We've gone through this line by line, multiple times. There's some good viable changes, but I don't think they're earth-shattering changes. And so I don't know if I would be very inclined to see if, I mean, I don't know if there's an appetite for this, but if it would be possible, but rather than bring this all the way back again for public comment again, I'm sure we'll find new things that we need to tweak and we need to perfect. I feel like at some point we have to pull the trigger on this. Ideally before the next USP update. So I don't know if there's an appetite for that, if that is even an option that we could pursue. And I do think there's things to be fixed, both what we've talked about and things that are further down and all that. But I'd be real tempted to make that recommendation. I don't know if that's on the table or not, but just thought I'd throw it out there.
I think we've gone too far in what we've done. I think when you look at operational standards, there's not that much more to it. When you look at records, there's probably a little bit there. If you look at F, which is office use, we didn't put any changes the first time around. So, and I don't think that there's a lot in recalls. My thought is I think we've gone too far. Because we would have to bring back the changes we've already discussed at this point.
Well, I guess what I'm suggesting is there an option to perhaps table some of those changes? Like we move forward with what we have, what's presented in front of us in writing already, and then we go back and fix the things. Because we're going to have to do that at some point.
I think that puts us right back to where we are right now. We might as well finish. I mean, yeah.
If we just leave it out now, we come back and we do it then, we have to send it back again for comment. So might as well just do it.
I think the key difference, though, is what's in front of us is a fundamental change to the thing. So there's not an option to go through and say, okay, let's accept the parts that we've already done and then come back and discuss the others, right? Like we can't do that because it's such a fundamental change. But if we get past the fundamental change part, you can start doing things piecemeal, and we could address them one at a time. I guess my concern is that we're going to go through this line by line, receive an additional set of public comment to further modify, and we just end up in this death spiral, and we're on this a year from now, 2 years from now.
Hopefully what we're doing right now gets us to the point where we're able to just move forward.
Agree. I'm almost finished.
Does anybody else propose changes?
No, but we do need to move past this, the little carve-out verbiage and coming up with something to prevent the vicious circle of abuse.
Batches. What if you make the batches smaller? I mean, who's going to want to do 5 times 100? You know, I mean, I guess you could, but the the smaller you make it, the less risk there is. Somebody would do it. I don't know. Or put the
24 because that's what it's.
or put the testing back in, and then
And that defeats the purpose of. Yeah, it is. I'm just not. I'm in soft mode. Yeah.
What if it allows for a small batch, 24, if you keep in with your number, or going less with what Donna said, for a single day, and that subsequent compounding for that day could only be done for patient specific? Because that way you cannot duplicate that batch multiple times. But if you got a prescription for a particular animal or a particular patient, you could then go back and compound for that patient.
Okay, so less than 24 and make it patient specific.
A subsequent batch would have to be patient specific.
what if anything below 24 is patient specific, and then that's the one.
Well, I see what you're saying, but on the other side of that, in the animal world, they need things that are antidotes.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So you've made
Yeah.
24. If you needed all 24 of those in one day, you couldn't start another batch, or you couldn't make another dose unless it was patient specific. And that would take out the loophole of doing 10 batches of 24 in the same day, because you would only be able to make one dose for that patient.
Okay, let's see what that looks like.
Does that sound logical to the group? I see yeses. I see yeses. Iman, does that? Okay. All right. Next thought or section we need to look at based upon our comments and
I had on my list line 1662, and it was also mentioned today about regarding substances used in sterile compounding, and adding the other pharmacopoeias that are very common in at least our world. That would be EP, which is European Pharmacopoeia, BP, British Pharmacopoeia, and JP, the Japanese Pharmacopoeia, in addition to USP. Of course, they would still come from an FDA-approved vendor.
does that need to be added in there as well?
I think that's already touched on elsewhere.
Okay. Any objections to that? All right, seeing none, let's move to the next.
My next one is line 2141.
Which starts with identities and amounts of all ingredients.
Yes, that in addition to particle size, salt form, purity, grade, solubility, we need to add in assay, loss on drying, and water content, because those are also items that need to be looked at from the certificate of analysis to determine potency.
I'm sorry, assay.
Assay, loss on drying, and water content. And then on line 2147, under physical description of the final compounded sterile preparation, to include desired pH of aqueous preparations.
I don't. I wonder if we. So, what are you intending on that one? Give me an example.
Like on your logged formula worksheet or your worksheet, it when it lists the physical description, it should say there what the pH is. Somewhere in here, the pH needs to be pointed out.
I like the example. I like the intent, but so I don't know that every sterile product would need pH testing though. So like if you have
aqueous.
Yeah, not even aqueous. So if we are combining non-sterile ingredients and doing all that, then yeah, absolutely agree, that type of thing. And maybe we list it as an example like the others, like an EG, pH when appropriate. But if you're doing two commercially manufactured things and you're making like an IV piggyback, something like that, there's no necessity to pH test that because you have the known pH of the two things and you're not further diluting with water. You're not further diluting, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but when making from scratch, from bulk, that whole process, that's where I think in some instances that the pH is being missed.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree.
I'm sorry, on lines 2153 and 2154, there's mention of other information that's needed. Would that not qualify for what you're trying to do?
There it mentions pH.
Yeah, it does there, but
testing.
I was wanting to really emphasize pH.
Jenny, I think I heard you say including desired pH of the aqueous preparation.
Right.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're not saying an actual testing showing what the pH was, but like what you're expecting or wanting the pH to be on the outcome.
It should be within this range. And then on your logged formula worksheet, this is what the pH was.
Does that change it for you, Randy?
It's just something that we normally wouldn't even look at in like the bulk of like your preparations compared just from sterile ingredients. I don't know if there might be an exception there. I could be wrong, but for the most part,
Cat 2 from non-sterile and Cat 3 is where it would come in.
So you could say for non-sterile, so basically you wouldn't even need to say that. You could just say for preparations compounded from, including pH, for preparations compounded from non-sterile ingredients. Does that cover it? Does that cover everything you're wanting to cover?
Well, and while you're thinking, let me go ahead and make this note. So going down to the 2147, we have crossed over into records. So we're out of operational standards. This is a record that's being put together. Just want to make sure that everybody had transitioned far enough. And I understand what you're saying and where you're going with it.
So specifically, we're looking at the master formulation record, and this
Right.
is under the requirements for the master formulation record.
And what Jenny's saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you're just saying that the desired pH or the pH that it was intended for the compound to be at would be documented in the master formulation.
Yeah, we would. I mean, if you were to apply that, it would basically, it really wouldn't mean much, honestly, on the sterile to sterile, because you would just be documenting a range and you wouldn't be reconciling that on the compounding record side, right?
Well, you're not going to test for it. You're not going to
test for it
you
anyway.
don't really even know what the result is. It would just be an NA, honestly. I mean, depending if your log looked like pH, it would just be not applicable here in this particular situation.
So do we think it would be covered to just do the products that are non-sterile? Or prepared from non-sterile ingredients, is what I'm trying to say.
There are some, those sterile to sterile, like, buffered eye drops that you do pH. Maybe not in the hospital world, but I'm trying to think of some things that aren't from bulk that would require it. And it would be like some of those buffered eye drops that come in on Friday at 4.
I guess just to kind of encapsulate where my hesitation on it is because it wouldn't really, if we were to just have it be everything and we just put a pH on there. I mean, to Danny's point, as long as the rules would allow for you to put down an A, but what separates that from something else, I would think. So, I mean, there's not any real data on that, is what I'm trying to say. So essentially, the reason we know it's not problematic is because what you're doing in a hospital is you're taking, even my most acidic solution is dextrose, right? So that I'm going to use as a diluent in a hospital setting. So my most acidic is going to be dextrose. It's going to have a pH of about 5. And then my drug is going to be, if it's compatible, which doesn't have compatibility data, I'm not going to make it anyway, right, for the rules. But assuming it's compatible, it's going to have a higher pH than that. And so I'm always in the vicinity of 7. So there's not really the necessity to test it, I guess. But your point on the eye drops is well taken. I don't know what you do with that.
So would it work, Jenny, if on, and again, you're right where it is at 2147, physical description of the final compounded sterile preparation, and then after that put examples would be pH. All right, if not,
I have a question. I don't have any more things to bring up, but I just had a question with regard to what one of the ladies said earlier and asking about a grace period for a start date. So if we finalize this, say, in November, at the November board meeting, when would it take effect?
So you can choose a different effectiveness date. It's normally 20 days after submission to the register is when it will go into effect. You can choose a different effectiveness date, or you could direct staff to do a grace period of enforcement, which is also something that we've done where the rule is in place, but it's an educational campaign for a while before it's actually moved into an enforcement place. So those are 2 options available to you. You could, I guess the drawback to giving it a later effective date is that it's not in the rule book. So people aren't, seeing that rule in the rule book there. They would have to go to the register publication for it to see what the new rule is going to be on a certain date. Whereas if it's in the rule book, but you're not doing an enforcement action on it and, until the educational campaign is completed, then it's in the rule book for people to refer to.
Okay, so we don't have to decide that until
adoption.
Okay,
final adoption. Okay, so the only 2 sections that we did not touch is F, which is office use, which we had no changes to it anyway, and then the other, which started on at line 2305, which was recall procedures. I want to make sure that we didn't miss anything there. Okay, and then the only question that I have to go back to, and I guess I'll ask this of everybody, because that means that we've gone through the entire thing. Is there anything from the comments that were made, the letters that we received, that we did not address or we should address?
I had one thing that I wasn't even going to bring up because I was hopeful that this was going to go through today, but since it didn't, and we do have to take it back for revision anyway, there is one thing that I think the board missed, myself included, and that is that we really didn't get, and I'm not proposing a task force or anything, but we didn't get input off of like people that do like the radiologic stuff. And at the same time that USP 797 was updated, 825, which is radio pharmaceuticals, was also updated. And one of the things that they updated was actually the temperature of their clean room, because of the fact that when you're dealing with irradiated things, achieving 60 degrees can be challenging. So since we are taking it for a revision to repropose, the only thing I would ask is if staff can, when it comes to the temperature, if we can add a statement basically that is in line with USP 825. I think they allow for 70 degrees, I think, Fahrenheit, whatever that translates to Celsius. But I heard that from actually a couple of the compliance inspectors that sometimes those individuals struggle to achieve their temperature goals. And since there is practice standards, professional practice standards that suggest an alternative temperature, it may be worthwhile to include those in our rules to ease the burden of compliance for those pharmacies that do radiopharmaceuticals.
Okay. All right. I guess my only question to everyone would be is, did we talked about changing those amounts for automation. Are we good with, and I'm not saying yay or nay that we need to, but I just want to make sure, was there anything we needed to do with % of testing to the 250 manual or to the 1,000 automation?
It's at 5% right now.
It's at 5% right now. We heard comments about, should it be 2 at one and 5 at another? Should it?
I would recommend going back to which would actually be in line with the comments we had, going back to what's in USP 71. So it actually has a table that specifies, and I think our rules used to reference that. So I would just suggest referencing back to that table, because it varies based on, like, it ramps up and then it decreases, the percentage decreases as your batch size gets bigger. But since we capped at 250 for the manual ad, I think it would be reasonable to pull that restriction back.
Well, I think the labs determine too what they tell you how many vials to send when you give them your formulation and your batch size. They tell you how many to send, and it follows 71.
Okay. Because I think that, Iman, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're prescriptive in how we have it now. So do we just leave it at 5%?
What's the verbiage? And do you know what the verbiage is in 71?
It's a table, and it's based off of the number of samples. So, for example, I think someone that provided comment made a statement along the lines of, if they did their current batch, it would be like under USP 71, they would submit 20.
Mm-hmm.
But if they follow 5%, they would submit 38.
Mm-hmm.
But the only reason we made it 5 across the board was because that would have mitigated potential risk of manual compounds of 500 and 750. So since we're not doing that, and if we're comfortable with the idea of automated compounding device being less risk, I think it would be reasonable to go with the USP 71.
Jenny, do you remember before you guys made the 5% compromise, there was that long paragraph of, if this, then you do this many, if this, you do this many,
Mm-hmm.
and we took all of that out
Right.
to do the 5%? That long thing
Mm-hmm.
was the chart put into Word form.
Okay.
Are we
If that-
allowed to reference that chart rather than having to reinvent that? Because it's a pretty easy little table.
Historically, the board has not wanted to reference USP because
Correct.
any future changes to USP would automatically
Change without our input.
change, without your input.
So should we just leave it at 5% and let people comment? And then
Yeah, let's take comment because we made a lot of changes.
okay. Then, at this point, what I would ask for is a motion to propose. Unless there are further comments. Megan's going to stop me.
Oh, no, it's just motion to propose with the changes.
With the changes,
Yeah.
yes.
I will move to repropose with all the edits we've decided on today.
I second.
All right, so I have a motion and I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, so we have one other piece of business for today. And with that, I'm going to start and hand it over to Danny.
Sorry. Thanks, Julie. Now we're going to talk about the review. It's a review of the fee recommendations. So the fees that we're going to talk about are increasing based on, it's necessary to cover the agency's FY26 and 27 appropriations that we had just received from the legislation. If you look at C, there is a chart that kind of goes over the different scenarios. So option 1 shows a proportional increase applied to the pharmacy and pharmacist fees. Option 2 shows a proportional increase applied to the pharmacy, pharmacist, and technician fees. And option 3 shows an evenly applied amount to the pharmacy, pharmacist, and technician fees.
All right, so what we need to do at this point, well, actually, I take that back. We do have one person that is registered to speak on this. We'll hear his comments, and then we'll begin our discussion. So is Chris Hobart in the room? All right. So we'll go ahead and start this discussion then. So we have 3 fees. You see the current, and let me back up for a second. So when you look at your agenda, the links for B 1.1, 2.1.1, and 2.1.2, and 2.1.3, I'm sorry, all the 2s, 2.1.1, 2.1.2, 2.1.3, don't necessarily link correctly, so you may have to manually open those up so that when John goes through them, you'll be able to see them. So if you look at the chart, which is C, this is what Danny has just gone over. We've got what our current license fees are, and then we have the 3 options. And you can, Danny's gone through exactly what those look like. So if we can go ahead and start the discussion to see which of these 3 fees we want to go, schedules we want to go forward with.
So I have a question about, I think when we did this last time, we decided not to give the technician any increase. And so I'm just wondering, when was the last time we increased for technicians versus, did we want to do it now? Do we know?
I really don't know. I can say that in the time that I've been on the board, so this is my second go around, and Brad would probably be able to tell better. We haven't raised the techs in quite some time.
I'm thinking 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
I think we've kept them out of it at least the last 6 years.
Yeah, there was discussion on that. I honestly don't remember.
It's been a while. We haven't done it. I can't remember when we did it, and I've been here a while.
That we've never done it while I was on the board. Yeah. Do you recall?
So I would propose that we look at option 2. I don't necessarily want to penalize technicians, but it's $4 compared, and we haven't done it in a while, that we at least do the proportional, and not have the pharmacy and the pharmacist take all the burden. I don't know.
I concur with that because it has been a while, and I think a $4 increase in technician fees is not going to break anybody's back.
Other thoughts? Yeah, so the reason is when you look at the number of licensees, there are so much fewer pharmacies than there are pharmacists. That's what causes that what looks like very weird math.
And there's 75,000 technicians. Times 4 is 300 grand. So that's where you're getting it. There's only 8,400 pharmacies. So that's where it's disproportionate from the pharmacies to the techs. So you make it up in volume with the technicians.
Yeah, it makes it look really, really weird, but it's
Algebra.
yeah, it's
No, don't do algebra.
yeah. What makes it look so funny is just the number of pharmacies compared to pharmacists compared to technicians. Okay. We'll need a motion. Well, actually, we don't, because it'll go to John from there. We just need a consensus. Is anybody opposed to, I mean, I think we're all opposed to 3 is my guess. Is that correct? And so what we're looking at right now is option 2, which both Brad and Donna have kind of put forward. Is that what we want to go with, or is there anybody that feels strongly that we should go to 1? All right. It looks like we are comfortable with 2. So with that, I will turn it over to John.
All right, thank you, Madam President. Board members, we're going to look at, we'll do them all 3 together. The first one we're going to look at is B 2.1, and the first one is B 2.2.1.1. Amendments to 291.6 concerning pharmacy license fees. You'll see there on line 6 where the initial license fee is going to go, and on line 10 where the renewal fee will go, and those will be included. What you just voted for, or what you just agreed on, and that's option 2. The next one is going to be B.2.1.2, amendments concerning 295.5 concerning pharmacist license or renewal fees. And here you're going to see the initial license fee on line 8 and the renewal fee on line 11. And again, that's going to be that second option. And the last one we're going to look at is B.2.1.3, amendments to 297.4 concerning pharmacy technician and pharmacy technician trainee registration fees. And on line 5, you're going to have the pharmacy technician training fee. On line 9, you're going to have the initial technician fee. Again, that's going to go with option 2. And then the renewal fee on line 11. And those are all 3.
All right.
And
Now,
real quick, I just want to point
okay.
out when you're doing your adoption, not to be surprised that the initial license fee is always going to be $3 more than the renewal fee.
Right.
So that, and then Iman found that in 2021, we increased the technician fee by $1.
I'm sorry, so it was 2021?
2021, $1.
Yes. Okay. All right. With that additional information, do I have a motion to propose? We have a motion to propose from Donnie, and I have a second from Randy. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
And for the record, your proposal is for option 2.
Option 2, with option 2, yes. Okay, just a couple of things, and then I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. One is those of us that attended NABP. It was really a good meeting. I did want to make sure that y'all heard personally from me my thanks. So at the convention, I did receive the honorary President's Award, the Carmen Catazon Award, and in my speech, I wanted to make sure that it was mentioned that I think that's a reflection of us, and that it reflects our board, all of you, and our staff. So I wanted to make sure that I thanked y'all as well in person. So thank you for all you do and your time and your commitment to the state of Texas. As a reminder, our next meeting is August the 5th. It will be a regular start time of 9 a.m., so be prepared for that. And if there is no other business or things that we need to put on the next agenda, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Yes, sir. Okay, we have a motion to adjourn from Donnie, and we have a second from Jenny. All those in favor? All right, it is 1:51, and we will show this meeting to be adjourned.